So we can start.
Good evening, members. On behalf of SIRC of ICAI, I welcome you all for the awareness program on audit maturity model and audit documentation. Today we have with us two eminent faculties who will be addressing and taking up the session. We have our beloved CMP Vijay Kumar sir and CARS Balaji sir. MP Vijay Kumar sir engaged with passion, pragmatic, and visionary, and a proven executive. Over 27 years of experience in chartered accountant in practice. Is a Central Council member of ICAI. He was the chairman, vice chairman, member of lot of committees, resource persons for accounting standards, IFRS, auditing standards, code of ethics, corporate law governance, capital market. Has over 20 years of teaching experience in accounting, financial reporting, and corporate laws. Authored books for professional and CA students. He is mentor to so many chartered accountants. With these few words, I would like to introduce Sri MP Vijay Kumar sir to this session. And I would also like to introduce Balaji sir, Sri CARS Balaji sir, a fellow chartered accountant from our institute, a Bachelor of Commerce from University of Madras. He's a practicing chartered accountant specializing in an audit and indirect taxation. Co-opted member of Auditing Assurance Standard Board of ICAI 2019, 20, and 21. Member Academic Council of Sri Shankara Arts and Science College, Kanchipuram. Is a member editorial board of Paduka Publication. Faculty for the following subjects for CA students: Auditing and Assurance for CA Intermediate, Advanced Auditing and Professional Ethics for CA Final, Indirect Tax Laws and Information System Control Audit for CA Final. He has co-authored a professional book, Paduka Company Law Ready Refresher, awarded as Best Outgoing Student and secured college first rank, regular speaker at various professional forums on subjects like GST, standards of auditing, completed certification course on international taxation. With this, I would like to introduce R.H. Balaji sir to this session, and I think after MP Vijay Kumar sir will take over the session. Thank you, sir. Over to you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Gopal Krishnan, for the introduction, and sincere thanks to first person of the region, Jalapati, and regional council members for the invite to be part of this very important initiative of the institute. Happy to share the forum once again with Balaji. I think this is the second time, I'm not sure if it's the third. And beyond the credentials, what you mentioned, Gopal Krishnan, I had the opportunity of seeing him at the AASB, and extremely happy and proud that we have someone who is given so much of time and importantly qualitative participation in the deliberations and preparation of various technical documents. I'm personally very proud of the work which he has done at AASB. Please continue to do the good work, Balaji. So let's come to the topic per se. I'll put my screen on. Is my screen visible now?
Yes.
Okay.
Visible.
Just yeah. So let me set a little bit of context before we get into what this audit quality maturity model is. As far as the audit is concerned, particularly in the last several years and more so in the last 1 year, we have been witnessing high decibel on how audit has to be done, expectations around audit. But let's step back and try to look at it very objectively, parking aside emotions. My own personal view, since the Clarity project of audit standards way back in 2009, the audit reporting has traveled a substantial distance over the last 12 years. Audit reporting always had this criticism that it was more a template-based reporting, and there wasn't much which a user of audit report could infer from an audit report. But my view, two major developments in audit reporting are SA 706 and SA 701, which is the recent introduction. SA 706 has empowered the auditors and requires an auditor to highlight as part of the audit report matters on which the auditor would like to lay emphasis, that is, those matters which are forming part of the financial statements, you want to draw user attention, you bring it up in your main audit report so that when a user reads an audit report, he or she knows that these are 2-3 things which the auditor wants the user to be conscious of, and other matters, namely those matters which are not part of financial statements but which are considered important for a user to know are highlighted in this SA 706. I've seen audit reports where audit firms have used it very precisely. There are many firms who have missed the opportunity of using SA 706. And there are some audit reports where, particularly in the context of public sector audits, there are people who have used that enabler very liberally and brought everything under EOM and other matters. It's been mixed practices, but overall I would say that it has been a very progressive development and it's getting better by the year. Second is SA 701 on key audit matters. We are now about 3 years old since the standard became applicable. As far as this SA 701 is concerned, this I would say as transformational as far as the audit report is concerned, because all these years as an auditor, we used to identify a list of important areas which we bring to the attention of those charged with governance, typically the board of directors or audit committee, and tell them that in this list of 15 points which have been identified, we have done these procedures and this is how we have satisfied ourselves. So what SA 701 requires is, out of that long list of items which you presented to those charged with governance, you filter it out and identify what are those super critical ones. The judgment is left to the auditor, super critical ones, and tell the users of the audit opinion that, look, during the course of our work, for this particular entity, these were the 3 areas which we believed were super critical. These are the reasons why we believed it is super critical. These 3 areas we performed work procedures in this manner and we satisfied it. So with this SA 701 now coming in place, the audit reports have become more communicative than ever, and importantly, the criticism of template-based audit opinion goes away, because each company has different areas of audit which are super critical. and consequently each audit report becomes fairly unique and specific to that particular organization. The good thing about SA 701 is, while it is mandatory for listed companies, for all other entities, the auditor has a freedom of choosing to apply 701 and report it as part of the audit opinion. And another good aspect of SA 701 is, even if an auditor does not choose to report on SA 701, where it's not mandatory, the company might require the auditor to report on SA 701. The reason is, for a reporting entity, for a business organization, that adds to the enhanced value of an audit opinion, because the users will get to know that either there are no supercritical areas, or if they are there, it is these 2, 3, 4, 5 areas, and this is how auditors have got that assurance. So it's just 3 years since it has come. My initial experience over the last 3 years is, most cases, people have tried to again make it a long list of key audit matters, which is not the intent, and have written lots of content. The idea of SA 701 was to narrow it down to those which were really super critical and make it precise for a user to get value. But I guess over time, we will reach that state of maturity. And then we have another very important development which will apply from financial year 21-22, which is the CARO 2020, which require auditors to report extensively on various matters, including matters of governance. So that's again a big development, and you will actually experience what CARO 2020 is in the month of April, May 2022, when you start actually drafting those CARO. When you read, sometimes it might give an impression that it's relatively not so difficult, but when you actually start drafting it for a particular entity, you would experience how much of communication is brought into that CARO 2020 as well. The point I'm trying to highlight with these 3 documents, 706, 701 and CARO 2020, is that there is a constant endeavor to increase the communicative value of audit report so that users tend to gain, and the so-called expectation gap keeps reducing. And this particular effort is important because if we continue to have that expectation gap, there is a risk that we may not be relevant anymore, and audits itself may become a question mark. It's in this context very important that we understand the expectations of stakeholders, filter them out, and then get ourselves ready to meet those expectations. Another important observation I would like to make as a preamble to this audit quality maturity model, why it came, audit quality maturity model, is when it comes to audit, there are many cases which we have come across as part of our regulatory process in the institute, where audits tend to be either checklist based or heavily documentation oriented. While checklists are important, while audit documentation is important, what is more important is audit is all about judgment, and that ability to make judgment is very important. So the checklist and documents, of course, Balaji is going to speak on documentation after me. both of them should assist an auditor in making a quality judgment. So checklist is not equal to audit, documentation is not equal to audit, but these two are important for forming a judgment, for an auditor to make a judgment and consequently express an opinion. So in the context of audit specifically, there is one very important development which is happening now. Thanks to Institute initiative, our Institute initiative, over a period of time, and specifically in 2016, our institute, which is a member of IFAC, and we have our member as a member in International Audit Assurance Standard Board, we have been able to convince International Audit Assurance Standard Board to take up a project on developing audit standards for less complex entities. Here we use a different expression called small medium enterprises. But in the context of audit, please recall, even for internal financial controls, we have a guidance note on IFC for small and less complex entities. So IASB has, at the instance of India, and over time garnering support from other countries, has now developed a separate set of audit standards for less complex entities. They took up the project after due research last year in the pandemic, and they gave a time schedule of publishing these standards by July 2021, and come July 21, they have actually published the exposure draft of audit standards for less complex entities. It is now at an exposure draft stage, and I would encourage all members to participate in responding to that exposure draft. In parallel, our institute, our Audit Assurance Standard Board, has in the recent past, and leadership of Sri G. Shekhar, has completed the project on developing audit standards for small medium enterprises. Exposure draft was issued, if memory serves me, sometime in December 20 or January 21, and these audit standards, already drafted by our institute, are now with IASB for consideration as to whether we should follow or issue our standards which we have developed for SME, or should we borrow the standards which have been developed internationally, because that project was also taken up at our initiative only, and our main standards are already a replica of the international standards. So that's the decision which the institute will take in due course. Coming little more closer to this topic for the evening, at the institute, last year we have established a Center for Audit Quality. We are only the second accounting body in the world to have actually set up this Center for Audit Quality. And please note, these are all initiatives which have been taken by the institute suo moto and ahead of what we tend to hear in the external environment. The only other country which has a body similar to this is the US AICPA, where they have set up what is called Foundation for Audit Quality. We at the institute, after a couple of years of deliberation, finally set up the Center for Audit Quality, and this center has been set up at Jaipur, where we have the Center of Excellence. What you see in the screen now, the picture which you see on the screen now, is our Institute Center of Excellence at Jaipur. which also has residential capabilities. There are hostel blocks attached. The idea is to use this infrastructure for three things: capacity building in audit. Second is to carry on research. And thirdly, to develop some objective models for developing audit quality. And this infrastructure is our institute infrastructure. And I would encourage all of you, whenever you travel towards Jaipur, please take a half a day and visit this center of excellence which we have. It's a nice campus. It's a nice campus. And if there are any programs announced at this campus, it's nice, particularly in seasons, to go through a good residential program in this campus. Now, on this topic, I'll continue a little more of context setting so that there's a good understanding of this audit quality maturity model. And a small disclaimer, as always, that the views I would share over the next 45 minutes or so are all my individual views. None of them should be seen as views of the council or the committees which I represent. Three fundamental principles. Some of you would have heard me on this, but I would like to spend time on the third one now, where opinion on financial statements, that is audit opinion on financial statements, is a communication. Just like you and I in personal life expect every communication we receive, whether we receive it from our peers, our staff, our family members, we expect every communication we receive to be complete and truthful. The audit opinion is also a communication, and that communication has to be only truthful and complete. Now, founder of the institute, the founder president of institute, late Shri G.P. Kapadia, and I want to take some principle out of this and set the context a little more. At the top, he talks about every learned profession should develop a sense of social purpose and social obligation, and this should be more so in the case of accounting profession. The way I understand this social obligation, social purpose, is not about planting trees, environment and all. What it basically means is the audit opinion which we issue is relied upon by so many stakeholders, including by banks and others, in extending credit. So when banks extend credit, and we know almost all businesses borrow, and we have a debt equity ratio on an average of 2:1, total outside liabilities to net worth of about 3:1 on an average for India businesses. So when it comes to the banking system, the banks are actually channelizing hard-earned savings of the public into credit for businesses, either for investment, capital expenditure or working capital. And if banks suffer a loss because of non-performing asset, that loss is not borne by the bank. It is not borne by the bank. It is the loss which is borne by the hard-earned money of the individual public. The reason is, whenever banks are arriving at the interest rate to be paid to the saving depositors, they basically look at the interest they earn less the margin they have to keep and the various costs they have to incur, including non-performing assets. The balance is what is paid to the depositors as their interest. That's the reverse way of looking at it. Instead of looking at borrowing cost and add, the reverse way to look at it is the way I explained. So imagine for a moment the non-performing assets were lower, the losses were lower. The individual depositors will get a higher rate of interest. And we all know in today's context, the bank interest rates are so low than inflation that people are actually losing principal. And the second way to look at it is, if the NPS are lower, then the lending rates can actually come down, which means more projects will become viable and there'll be more economic activity as well. So it is in this context that this great gentleman's views around social purpose and social obligation have to be read. So when we issue an audit opinion and we say it's a going concern, everything is fine, and within 3-4 months, the company petitions for insolvency, it doesn't look so nice about the audit opinion which has been issued as recent as 3 or 4 months confirming going concern. So it is in this context that what he mentioned is relevant. Now, this is a summary of SA 700, which is on audit report. This one slide summarizes the entire work of an auditor. So when you do an audit, the output, the outcome is audit report, which is SA 700. So this one single chart is like the main chart which every auditor needs to test before you actually issue an audit opinion. SA 700 is just this one single slide, and it has bearing on audit quality. Audit quality is nothing but your audit opinion, the robustness or strength of that audit opinion. So among the several things, I'll just highlight a few things. I'll leave a copy of the slide deck behind for you, but I'll just highlight a couple of things as to how it gets to influence audit quality. So SA 700 requires, as an auditor, before I sign the audit report, I have to satisfy myself whether the financial statements are adequately disclosing the significant accounting policies. I need to convince myself whether all the accounting policies have been disclosed. Similarly, I also need to convince myself on the consistency and appropriateness of accounting policies with reference to the financial reporting framework. So I may follow a framework which is accounting standards or Ind AS. With reference to that framework, we have two frameworks, AS, Ind AS. So with reference to that framework, is the accounting policy appropriate and is it consistent? So I need to satisfy myself. So I should do that checkbox. And similarly, reasonableness of accounting estimates. So if you look at any financial statements, it's all made up of judgments and estimates. There are hardly anything in the financial statements which actually is an actual number. All of it involves estimation. Whether it is your income statement, so revenue, there is estimation, percentage of completion method, etc. Expenses, be it depreciation or employee cost, defined benefit plan, all of these have some amount of estimations to be done. Estimated useful life, actuarial valuation, so all these estimations come. Similarly, in balance sheet as well, your property, plant, equipment, WDV is an estimate because depreciation itself is an estimate. Investments lower of cost and fair value, it's an estimate. Inventory lower of cost and net realizable value, which is an estimate. Receivables less provision for bad debts is an estimate, and the list goes on. So as an auditor, I need to convince myself before I issue that audit opinion on the reasonableness of all of the accounting estimates which are used. So audit quality is basically testing your audit opinion which you issue in 700, where there's this flow chart which I've shown here. I've spoken on only 3 elements, but there are others as well. So whether all of this have done it appropriately to stand the test of scrutiny. And if you look at this flow chart at the bottom, before you conclude on reasonable assurance, for all of this, you need to have sufficient appropriate audit evidence. That's the documentation which Balaji will speak a little while now, based on which you have to conclude reasonable assurance and then issue the audit opinion. These are some hard facts from the Quality Review Board of our institute. Quality Review Board was introduced into the CA Act way back in 2007, and this was done basically for bringing an independent body within the institute to have an oversight on quality. It was a very well conceptualized idea, and it continues to do good work. Only limitation it has had is in terms of the number of reviews which it could complete. So this Quality Review Board has 11 members, of whom 6 are, all the 11 are appointed by the government, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, all the 11, of which 6 are outside of the chartered accountancy profession, and 5 are from the council members. 5 are from council members as approved by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. And the chairperson is always from the 6th, that is from the outsiders. So this 11 people review through a mechanism of what we call as a hot review, where technical reviewers with adequate industry experience of 20 years, they go to the audit firm, personally spend a week's time there, review the working papers of audit which is done, and come to a conclusion on whether the audit quality is acceptable or not. If it is not acceptable, and it is not infringing on the true and fair view, then through a due process, an advisory is given to the audit firm for subsequent improvement. But if it affects true and fair view, then it goes for a disciplinary action. This board, even though it was amended and brought inside the law in 2006-7, it eventually started working only from 2012. And since then, they have reviewed on an average about 80 to 90 audits a year. And what you would find on the right side, the pie chart talks about the outcome of such audits. And please note, up to 2018-19, all the reviews are relating to listed companies. And from 2019-20, because NFRA was formed and jurisdiction got carved out, from 2019-20, it is with reference to unlisted companies. Now, the summary of findings of these 8 years of work is that about 6% of cases, there was a need for significant improvement, and about 6% 60% of cases, improvement was required, and the other 34% was generally acceptable. While many of us might come to a quick conclusion that it's only 6% where significant improvement is required, but I think as a profession which is committed to excellence, we need to look at the 66% as a number. 66% is a number on which we have to do a lot of work to address what we call as the delivery gap. So when people talk about expectation gap, one of the components of that expectation gap is the delivery gap. And it is about 66% of cases where there is a scope for improvement and some cases of significant improvement. Now, key statistics for this same period. The audit firms reviewed were about 72 firms in the year 1920, and about 69 entities were reviewed, and 87 audit files were picked up. 87 files were picked up among these 69. And if you look at this pie chart of 1920, 3% of cases significant improvement required, and 82% of cases improvement is required, which means almost 85% of cases there is some observation or the other for improvement in the audit quality, and that is what all of us are trying to target. And please note, this is the work of a board which sits within the institute, which is the quality review board. Now, the percentage of reviewed which have observations on standards on auditing. So, and this is a published report available in the institute website, and I would encourage those firms who are focused on audit, who have audit as a significant area of practice, to positively look every year at the annual publication of the quality review board. And if you look at this particular chart, it shows that a large number of firms, SQC1 is an area of concern. So as far as SQC1 is concerned, standard on quality control. So within the firms, having a quality manual and a quality control procedure has been found lacking in almost about 26% of the audit firms. And that's a big area of concern. And please note, these are all firms who are auditing listed companies and very large unlisted companies, Now, on accounting standards, there are observations spread across many, but look at accounting standard 1 as fundamental as accounting standard 1, significant accounting policies. There were 13% of entities where even accounting policies have not been drafted well. So for a profession which is about 70 years old, 70 years old, the observations around something as fundamental as significant accounting policies. And recall, I showed you that one slide on SA 700, and that slide on SA 700 starts with auditor coming to a conclusion on whether the accounting policies have been disclosed, whether they are appropriate and consistent with the framework. So without that, the question of issuing an opinion, which is a unmodified opinion, does not even arise. So this is the outcome of the work which has been done by the quality review board. Similarly, we have the financial reporting review board, which does what we call as a cold review. I don't want to go into details here, but I just want to draw your attention to two things. One, for the firms which are focused on audit, I would encourage that please do not miss out on the publications of FRRB, and because these are the observations from an actual review done of the listed companies. And those observations, if you train your staff on that, you can ensure that those mistakes are avoidable in the audits which we do. So that's one thing I would like to highlight. The second point I would like to highlight is, unlike quality review board, financial reporting review board does what is called as a cold review, where we review the financial statements as a user. We don't go to the audit firm. We just look at annual report and form our views on whether presentation is correct, whether the disclosures are made correctly, whether the audit opinion is issued correctly and all. And what is very important here, and I would like all of you to take note of the following, is that when it comes to accounting standards and auditing standards, I have come across many who have this understanding that these standards are meant for the preparer of financial statements and auditors. Please note, as per the framework of accounting standards or audit standards, these are standards which are drafted keeping in mind the user of the financial statement, not keeping in mind the preparer and the auditor. They're all drafted keeping in mind the user of financial statement. Is the user getting the right information, and can he rely upon it for his decision making? So the entire standard setting process is focused completely from a user's perspective. That is the user of the financial statement, not preparer, not the auditor. So at FRRB, again, on an average about 80 annual reports a year are done. Some of them are referred from SEBI, CBI and other statutory authorities. Those we call it as special cases. Rest of it, we have a tool for randomly selecting what we call as suo motu cases. And here about 63% of the cases, we have issued advisories to the audit firms for improving the quality. 17% of cases, we have referred it to SEBI, MCA, etc. for action to be taken. So almost about 80% of cases, there is either an advisory to the audit firm directly, or there is a recommendation to the relevant regulatory authorities for taking action. So this is standard-wise observations of FRRB, both audit standards and the accounting standards. Now, coming to this audit quality maturity model. Happy to share with all of you that we are the first country in the world to have developed this audit quality maturity model. It was important because we all know anything which gets measured gets monitored. If it is measured, it gets monitored. If it is not measured, it is unlikely to be monitored. It is in this backdrop that to enable audit firms to do a evaluation of where they stand in the maturity curve, that this particular model was developed. We developed this model on the confidence of the success we achieved in the digital competency maturity model, which we issued way back in 2017. And we were again the first country in the world, first accounting body in the world to have issued that model. It's not the first which matters there, but I want to share this so that all of you feel proud about the work at the institute. Of course, there are lots of areas for improvement and it's a journey. The digital competency maturity model developed by institute, the European Federation of Accountants and Auditors, EFA, European body, has taken copyright from our institute This is the first occasion where a global body, a European body which covers the whole of Europe, has taken copyright from the institute and have issued the same document for the accounting firms in Europe. So that's the confidence we have got that we have traveling in the right direction. And based on the strength of that success and confidence, we have developed this audit quality maturity model. And we have, after a reasonable amount of debate, decided to call this as version 1.0. Very rarely you come across a situation where somebody tells on day one itself this version 1, which means either 1.1 or version 2 will come. Yes, it will come. Whether it will come after 3 years, 5 years, time will tell. But we were all conscious at the council that this model is probably not the perfect model. So there is some implementation experience you have to gather, and based on implementation experience, we should refine this and make it a more robust document. So this model which I will introduce to you, I want to begin with this caveat that it is a very humble beginning with a very good objective of giving the audit firms a tool to measure so that they can monitor and improve upon it. But at the same time, an acknowledgement of the fact that this is work in progress based on implementation experience. The institute will consider the implementation experience of next 1 year, 2 year, 3 years and revise this model accordingly. This particular maturity model, which has been launched on CA Day, 1st July 2021, and all the arms of the institute have been requested to do minimum 2 programs in a year for dissemination of knowledge on this particular model. So this particular model is recommendatory in nature for a year, and next year the council will decide whether to make it mandatory, for whom, how, all those modalities will be discussed later. But the idea is to begin with it as a recommended model. The objective of this audit quality maturity model, as the nomenclature suggests, is to enhance audit quality. And it is imperative because, as I mentioned in my initial context setting, the users of audit opinion depend on audit quality to get confidence in financial statements. And we all know that audit quality is a complex one, and it is so very difficult to define what constitutes quality audit. And audit quality is something which we need to improve at the engagement level, client engagement level, audit firm level, and nation as a whole. We need to do it. So it is keeping in mind this objectives that this maturity model has been developed. So this particular model idea is to encourage stakeholders to explore ways to improve audit quality. When I mean stakeholders, basically the audit firms, and to facilitate greater dialogue between the stakeholders on audit quality. Forums like this, idea is to develop that conversation and to raise awareness of the key elements of audit quality. So how does one measure audit quality? So for this purpose, we ended up with four elements. One is complying with the professional standards. Am I doing the work as per the standards on auditing? If the answer is yes, then the audit quality, you have crossed one checkbox. Similarly, another element is complying with the firm's own quality control procedures. So many audit firms, and I wish all have it, reasonable good number of audit firms have their own quality control manual. So whether the audit has been done as per the manual of your own audit firm, So first element is, are you doing the audit as per the audit standards? Second is, have you done the work as per your own firm's quality control procedures? That's the second measure of audit quality. The third is whether the audit conclusions have been reported correctly. Recall when I talked about SA 706, I told you there are many cases I've come across where either there is unwarranted reporting of emphasis of matters, or it was required but it was not done. And I've also come across cases, and many times this little more skewed on public sector audits, where modified opinions have been issued, SA 705, wherein there was no need to issue a adverse report, but auditors issued an adverse report. A qualified report would have been enough. So an adverse report is required when there is a pervasive nature. Otherwise, a qualified report is enough. So we have come across instances where on the reporting itself, modified report was not required, but it was issued, and vice versa. Or even a modified issued report is issued, adverse had to be given, but they gave qualified, or vice versa. So all those kind of things also have a bearing on audit quality, because that is the outcome. And lastly, compliance with the ethics requirements of the entire audit team. The ability of the audit team to be independent and to express themselves is what is important. So these four were identified as essential elements based on which you can come to a view around audit quality. And during the peer review, we have, and these are all evidence-based available at the institute. Audit documentation is inadequate. In fact, pardon me for making this observation, but it is grossly inadequate. And when it comes to audit documentation, of course, Balaji will speak, and let me not steal the thunder from him. I'm sure he will deal with it. So grossly inadequate. Second is, most firms did not have a practice manual or a quality review manual, or it was maintained but never followed. Management representation letters were not taken. There is no written communication to those charged with governance, and there is no evidence of the technical standards having been followed. And these were all identified during the course of several peer reviews. Now, audit quality maturity model. What is the objective? The objective are essentially three in number. One is, to which all audit firms should this model be applicable? Second is, what are the areas based on which you should measure the audit quality maturity? And lastly, what should be the methodology for deriving the audit quality maturity status? I'll speak about all these three things, but before I go to the next point, among the three things, the first one was to whom it should be applicable. The last one is how do we quantify the numbers. But the second one is, what are the areas based on which you will come to a judgment on audit quality maturity of the firm. And please note here, when we use the expression audit quality maturity, it is in a sense audit practice maturity, And please note, as far as the questions are concerned, I will walk you through now. Please do not react on them, because I know some of the questions are probably not too very appropriate, or the weightage or scoring is not too very appropriate. As they put a caveat, this is version 1.0, and in this particular model 1.0, the audit practice maturity has been arrived based on the age of the firm, the size of the firm. The logic is, if you are in practice for a reasonably long period, there is so much of knowledge which has got accumulated in the area of audit. The size of the firm also is an indication of the breadth of exposure which you have and the ability to implement the quality control procedures. So those kind of elements have been factored in while developing this questionnaire. So broadly, 3 areas of questionnaire we have. One is in the area of practice management, operations. Second is the context of human resource management. Ultimately, audit is about people. Of course, we will have IT tools, artificial intelligence, etc., all those things. But please note, whenever you develop an IT tool and write a query, when you write a query in SQL, that query is written only by a person who has knowledge of audit. So while the tool will go and look through the huge data available and filter it out for you, but the people are the important component of an audit quality. Their capabilities are important. And last is in terms of practice management, how is the firm directionally proceeding in its strategic thinking and the way it functions. So broadly, these are the 3 areas based on which some queries have been developed, weightage has been given, and a particular model has been arrived at. Now, so 1.0 will apply initially for bank, for listed audits of listed entity. So if I'm an audit firm having audit of listed entity, this model is applicable. Second is those who are doing audits of banks other than cooperative banks, and it excludes multi-state cooperative banks. And lastly, auditors of insurance companies. If you are doing audits of only branches, then this model will not apply. So the idea is, most likely when it becomes mandatory in phase 1, it is currently recommendatory. When it becomes mandatory in phase 1, it will apply to all the audit firms who have a client who is either a listed entity or a bank or an insurance company. And how will this be administered? I think the institute will decide sometime early part of the next calendar year. Now, recall I told about 3 sections are there for determining audit quality. The first section is on practice management, and in practice management there are about 9 questions with sub-questions, 9 areas with sub-questions which are there, and each area, depending on the questions and weightage of the questions, there are maximum scores available. For example, practice areas of the firm, there's some 3 questions or so and 12 marks. Similarly, with reference to quality review manuals inside the firm, there's a total score of 24. Then when it comes to quality control, service delivery, bulk of the marks are there, almost 36 plus 80, 116 marks. So totally 280 marks for this area. On human resource management, there are about 5 elements with sub-questions, and these elements are regarding your resource planning and monitoring, employee learning and development activity, the turnover of the attrition of employees and the compensation management, qualification skill sets of the audit staff, the performance evaluation measures which you follow. All of these together is another 240 marks. Lastly, on strategic thinking and key functions, so 3 elements with several sub-questions aggregating to about 80 marks. And here it includes questions around infrastructure. How good is your digital infrastructure in the audit firm? So that you can have some of the best practice of audit. So you get some good marks for that. So like this, some scores marks have been allotted. So in all, these 3 sections together have a total scoring of 600, broken up into these 3 areas, 280, 240 and 80. Please recall, now we'll go through the individual questions to some extent, but please recall I told you this is version 1.0, and the idea is during this recommendatory phase, we will gather feedback. And I also want to share with you, very important, I should have told you 5 minutes back. Before this model was launched, we also did what is called field testing. Normally, whenever we develop a new standard, we do a field test. We ask a few organizations to apply it and give us the feedback. Here also, we did a field test, socialized it among a few audit firms, asked them to apply it in their respective firms, and their feedback was included in finalizing this particular model. Of course, it's a small sample, and we are looking at implementing this across a large population. The next important thing also we should keep in mind is, among the practice units we have, there are many practice units for whom audit is not a focus area. So those firms need not break their head about this model. This model is meant for those audit firms who have a focus on audit practice. If your focus is on tax compliance, indirect tax compliance, company law compliance, information technology, etc. So those cases, this model is not relevant to you. This model is basically developed for probably 5,000, 6,000 audit firms, or maybe lesser, who have a high focus on audit and are involved in audit of a listed company or a bank or insurance company. But for other firms also who do audit for unlisted companies, I know there are many audit firms who do audits only for unlisted companies, and they have a very clear policy that they will not do a listed company audit. They don't want it. They just don't want it. They believe I have capabilities around unlisted company, I'll stay focused on that. Listed companies, SEBI, LODR, all that stuff, and public interest, I don't want to be there. So there were some audit firms are very comfortable and they say, I'll focus only on audit of unlisted companies. So for those audit firms also, as long as you have a focus area on audit, this model is a good model. Now, out of the score of 600, if an audit firm is scoring up to 25% in each of the 3 areas, 25% each of the 3 areas, then you are considered a level 1 firm, which is basic. Then if your score is between 1 25% to 50%, 25 to 50%, then you are considered as the level 2 firm. But please note, you should have this score across all the three levels, then you are considered to be a level 2 firm. And if you are 50 to 75, level 3, but I repeat, you should have this score in all the three levels. So you should have 50 to 75% in section 1, 50 to 75% section 2, and 50 to 75 in section 3. If you have in each of the three, then you become level 3, and above 75% is level 4. And my own dipstick survey and understanding, most of the firms are likely to fall between level 2 and level 3, and the questions will be so obvious that you can start taking steps for how do I move from level 2 to level 3 and level 3 to level 4. And please note this level 1, 2, 3, 4. For those who are familiar with the information technology industry, software industry, we have a similar model for software industry called CMMI, Carnegie Mellon Maturity Model. We have a model available in for IT industries, where they also have level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 is considered to be more mature kind of software development practices. Companies like TCS and all would fall in there. So similar to that, we have 4 levels, and these are the scoring pattern which I mentioned to you. So let me walk you through a few questions. I don't think I'll be adding much value by going through each of the individual questions, all the individual questions. I will walk you through a few questions so that you get a sense of how these have been drafted. And I would encourage every audit firm, the partners to come together, have a 2-hour sitting and go through these questions. Do not question the relevance of the question or the weightage given. I've told you this caveat earlier. Accept this as it is. Get back to us on some of the questions you feel have to be improvised upon or weightage, and we will certainly take back that feedback and unhesitatingly make those changes. So these questions, a few of them, I would encourage you to spend those 2-3 hours. I'm sure you will have some important revelations or action items to take. Now, first of the questions regarding practice management in terms of the scale of operations is the revenue from audit and assurance services. Is it at least 50% or more of the firm's revenue? So if your audit practice is contributing more than half your revenue, then you get a score of 4. So the idea is, as I told earlier, this is basically meant for audit firms who have audit practice as an area of focus. So if that is your area of focus and your experience is reflected in terms of more than half your revenue coming from audit, then it is treated as 4 points. Otherwise, you get a score of 0. Does the firm have a mission statement and a vision statement? If you have it, you get a score of 4, else 0. The objective of having this is to drive a consistent culture across the firm. So as the firm, all of us should stay committed to a common cause and should have a common view. So does the firm have a good practice like a defined mission statement and a vision statement? And how do they address forward-looking practice? There's so many changes which are happening in the practice environment. How is the audit firm getting geared to handle that? I'll just give two examples, and please note, these are early days and my personal view. For example, in UK and many countries, what is coming up very clearly is, if you want to be in the area of audit of public interest entities, then non-assurance services should be 0. You should do it in a separate entity. So you can't combine everything in a single organization. So some jurisdictions, firms have gone and given a voluntary commitment, and they have actually separated the organization as well. So that's one directional change which is coming. The second is, it is still at an evolution stage. I don't know whether it will come and when it will come. If you look at the medical profession, just like accountancy profession, medical profession is all about individual skills, individual ethics, but there is so much of technology intrusion in the medical profession that it has become very, very capital intensive. So medical profession is now corporatized, and there's huge amount of capital going into that profession. So similarly in audit firms also, given the expectations around the coverage of audits and quality of audits, there's the need to invest huge amounts of capital in developing IT tools. We can't borrow third-party tools because it will not distinguish one firm from the other. So many large firms will start, reasonably medium and large firms will start developing their own proprietary technologies, both software and infrastructure, IT infrastructure, all of which will cost capital. So there is a model which is under discussion that should we have two categories of partners in a firm? Partners who give financial capital, partners who give professional knowledge. So financial capital guys will get their financial return, and professional guys will get a return for whatever skills they bring to the table. Early days, but important point here is, as a firm, are you having thinking in those directions? Similarly, do you have audit manuals which will conform with the firm's audit methodology? And for compliance with audit standards, are there templates, standard templates available, so that whether it is partner A or partner B or partner C, each partner follows a standard templatized process of letter of engagement, management representation, etc. You have a standard template. So do you have those kind of standard templatization? So when it comes to quality, some of the sub questions are, whenever you accept a client, you have to test the client as to whether the client is acceptable to you. There can be independent reasons why you can't accept a client. There can be reasons like, there's a client who is in telecom sector who comes to me, but I don't have capabilities in that. So I would like to make an assessment of that. So firms typically build a checklist before you can accept a client. For example, some may tell, I will not accept clients where the principal shareholders have a particular track record. So those kind of client checklist. Similarly, the methodology which you follow for evaluation of independence of the partners, audit managers, audit staff. So every time a client work is taken up or a work is commenced, you have to test independence of everybody in the firm, independence including independence with reference to self-interest threat, familiarity threat, intimidation threat, self-review threat, etc. All of those needs to be done. And does the firm have a policy towards withdrawing from an engagement or rejection of clients? So when you are rejecting a particular audit appointment, it should be done as per a policy. Or if you are withdrawing from an audit engagement, you should have a defined policy saying that in these circumstances, I will withdraw from the engagement. So that's the kind of quality review manuals or audit tool which is there. So do you have standard checklists for various elements of financial statements audit, what is the templates or the process available for audit documentation, and whether the quality control process is reviewing all of this. In terms of service delivery, do you have a mechanism of monitoring the efforts? So when I commenced the audit, I thought X number of hours of partner, 3x hours of manager, 10x hours of staff. So how is it distributed? Are you monitoring all of that stuff, capacity planning, and then budgeted time versus actual time? So if those metrics are there, you get a score of 4. If they are not there, you get a score of 0. So like this, you have sub questions around these various elements. So that's on practice management. Now, as far as HRMS is concerned, human resource management, this is the second big segment. And here, there are questions around, does the firm have a process of resources planning? So many audits are there, so many resources we have. This is a shortfall of resources. The skill sets which are missing is so much. We have 3 NBFC clients, and there's one audit manager who had experience of NBFC client. He has left the job. So how will I handle the 3 NBFC clients where there's so many RBI regulations and all? So those kind of assessment is to be done. And what is the tools which are being used for allocating the resource? So people are put to project A, project B, project C, client A, client B, client C. So how are you ensuring the experience is better used on those things? And is there a tracking mechanism of productivity of employees, etc.? So if these are there, you get a score of 4. And does the firm have some kind of a framework of relationship between, I have let's say 50 staff, how many managers I should have, how many partners? So what is the ratio which I follow? Like for example, if you come to colleges and schools, the state government or university has ratio of teacher to the student, ratio of sub-staff to students. There are ratios available. So as a firm, do you have some ratios like that to say that for a staff strength of 5, I will have 1 manager and 2 managers per partner? So what is the kind of approach you have? And then what is the L&D policy? How are you doing your training for your staff? So how much time is spent? How are you tracking it? Whether they are learning well? So all the guidance is available here. There are questions around that. And there are also questions around whether the firm has a performance management culture that rewards high performing employees and demonstrate high levels of commitment towards quality and ethics. So it's very important to have a good reward mechanism so that people are driven towards audit quality and driven towards compliance with professional ethics. So those kind of things are there. Again, attrition. So if you have excessive attrition, it is not good. So depending on attrition compensation management philosophy, some scores are awarded. Now, the last one regarding the strategic or functional areas. So here, from a strategic perspective point of view, does the firm have a balance between experienced resources and younger resources? Because in audit, it's all about judgment and experience matters. So if I have a firm of 5 partners, are all the 5 of them partners with 3 years experience, or is there at least 1 or 2 partners who have a 10-15 years of experience? So for the partners experience, you get a different weightage and marks are awarded here. And compliance with the Institute Code of Ethics, etc., professional independence. So what is the process followed? So for that, again, there's a score. Is there a whistleblower policy within the firm? So where people can raise an internal complaint without getting punished for the same. So that again, you get a score. What is the infrastructure available? Recall I told you at the start that the size of the firm, age of the firm gets some weightage. So if you have some branches, or you have associates or network firm or affiliate, it is assumed that you get more exposure and the maturity of the firm is higher. So based on that, some scoring is there. And whether the branch functions are decentralized or centralized. So if it is centralized, there is a responsibility of pushing a uniform culture throughout, because many audit firms we find they work in silos. So they would have 3 branches, but all the 3 function as if they are 3 separate firms. So if that is the case, then you get penalized with a lesser score. But if you have a common approach, then you get a higher score. So those, and for your IT and all, whether you have a physical and logical security for information implemented, so those kind of elements are there. Whether you got empaneled, whether there are observations from QRB, peer reviews, etc. So based on that and all, some scores are given. So this is how the entire model is structured. Individual questions are all self-explanatory, but the effort of the institute, and I request all of your support in the journey of the institute to make this model a robust one, and it will be India's contribution to the accounting world at large. Already other accounting bodies have started studying this particular model. They started studying this particular model. But my own personal view, and I repeat, my own personal view, that this model will get maturity based on the feedback which all of you will share over a period of time. So thank you all for your patient listening, and look forward to interacting with you in future. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay accountable. I noticed that there are a few questions. Selva, I missed out the question, Selva. I just saw that spreadsheet. Selva?
Is it visible, sir? I'm sharing my screen, sir. Is it visible?
Okay, it's not visible.
Are you able to see the screen, sir? 1 minute, I'll just stop it again.
Now it's visible, Selva. Okay. So there are 3 questions. Let me respond to them. Many mid-sized audit firms carry 1 or 2 large or listed entities, though their main practice area is audit of SMCs and tax credit. It is a big challenge to comply with the quality standards. I do agree with this observation, but I also request the member concerned to put this question to appreciate that when we take up a response, like for example, a doctor who says that I do only 1 surgery a month, and otherwise I just do clinic practice. You don't expect me to do it as professionally as somebody who does surgery every day. The moment you are auditing a listed entity, it's a public interest entity. A listed entity is considered public interest globally. So whether it is accounting standards, Ind AS is applicable, which is a very complex or very large literature. And there are LODR, other obligations and all. So I think if you have accepted a listed company audit, I think it's imperative to scale up to meet those expectations, I don't think we have a alternate on that. We have to invest on the same. The way to look at it, if I were you, the way I would look at it is, whatever investment I do in quality for listed company audit, I will amortize that investment. I'll amortize the learning, amortize the quality practices on the audits of unlisted companies, SMCs, deliver better job, hopefully get little better fees, better retention, and expand the practice. That is the way I would see it. Second question, when thinking is to do away with audit for MSA. I think the second question, I think President has clarified. I don't think there is that intent with either the institute or the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. What we have come across is an individual who has occupied the office of chairman. As an individual, he has made an observation or he has published a document, chosen to publish a document. The institute and MCA, both of them have communicated in no less terms that this was not done with a due process. So consequently, there is no such proposal as we speak now, either at the institute or at the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Future time will tell, but currently it is not there at all. And at the institute, there is substantial amount of effort going on with the president. As the protocol, it's the president who represents with the ministry, who is actively engaged with the ministry in communicating the importance of audit for all entities and all. Third is, can you please throw light on status of audit tools being developed by ICAI? As far as the institute is concerned, I should admit that we could not make much progress. We have taken up the project of developing audit tools 3 years back, and we have also committed some resources. We have gone through 2 rounds of RFP. Unfortunately, we did not get right responses, and both RFPs we could not pursue it. Now we have to again go through a process of developing a fresh RFP and then take the next steps. So all the council members are united in terms of the need for institute to develop. Very important, because it's a high cost investment with obsolescence risk being very, very high. So firms can't invest 1 crore, 2 crores, and in 3 years find that the software is no longer relevant. It's a huge cost. So institute is willing to put that resource. It's again members' money. It's again only members' money. We are giving capacity development in the form of guidance notes, etc. IT tool is one more tool for capacity development. So institute has that commitment, but it will take some time. And to be very honest, only after the new council gets constituted, the project will move further, because 2 efforts, very good efforts, have been put in terms of RFP. Unfortunately, we did not get enough bids or quality bids to pursue it. Probably we have to rework on the criteria and see if we can get some better interest and then develop some tools. So thank you all once again for the patient listening, and look forward to staying in touch with you. And thanks Gopal Krishnan for moderating today's session. And Balaji, best wishes to you for your next session. I hope I am on time and I did not eat your time.
Yes, sir. So thank you, sir. It was a very thoughtful, thought-provoking session. I think you started with the checklist and audit documentation and its usage for making the judgment with that, and started with the SA700, and you highlighted on QRB, and then you focused on the audit quality maturity module version 1, and then how does one measure audit quality with a chart and the applicability of AQAM, and then FEM audit quality maturity rating. And I think you detailed the entire practice management, human resource, and the strategic ones. I think this was extremely thoughtful, though it is going to be a new thing which everyone has to start doing. And I think definitely the session would really throw a light, and we will all start practicing on this, because as you said, rightly said, we have to start somewhere, and I think this is the point from where we will all start up on this. With this assurance, I once again thank you, sir, on behalf of SIRC and on behalf of all the members, for having spent your valuable time and giving your guidance and throwing a light on this extremely, which is going to be an important practice session for all of us in due course of time. Thank you, sir. I think now, Balaji sir, I think you can take your session, sir. Over to you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Gopalakrishnan, sir. Very good evening, dear SIRC members. Very good evening to my beloved Guru, our Central Council member, CA MP Vijay Kumar, sir, and all the office bearers of SIRC for making this wonderful evening with an enchanting learning with people like MPV, sir. Here, the audit quality maturity model, which is the order of the day that is taught by the Institute, where they are trying to implement this particular aspect for evaluating the maturity, as the MPV sir was rightly pointing it out, where there are a lot of requirements from the legal and regulatory front in order to cater that particular legal and regulatory front, and also to ensure that we do the qualitative expectation that is from the public at large, where there is something called as financial reporting ecosystem. So to cater the entire financial reporting ecosystem, this particular audit quality maturity model is having a very important impact, and it will definitely help the people to go for the right practice here. With regard to today's discussion, where we have two important topics, where awareness program that is being organized here, one with regard to the audit maturity model that's developed by Center of Audit Quality by Institute, and the second one is the audit documentation perspective, which is somewhat related to our own practice with regard to audit of financial statements, how to go and comply with, how to prove that I have done my audit in the way in which it is expected, and how to satisfy the various responsibilities that is casted by the ecosystem to the auditor here. So my discussion will be exclusively on this particular audit documentation, and also I will try to have something relating to the audit tools that MPV sir was talking about, either in an automated manner or in a manual way, how to go and have its impact on our regular day-to-day affairs. With regard to the complaints perspective, where the platform has been very rightly set out by our Central Council member, where you have something called quality review board, you have something called as a peer review board, where you have NAFRA's requirement of verification. You have our own internal verification mechanism with regard to the complaints perspective. So in order to be brief for another 10 to 5 minutes, I'll just have the platform. What is the necessity for us to ensure that the quality is being maintained? What is the necessary for us to ensure that we have done the way in which it is expected? Why I need to prove that I have done the job rightly, which is casted to the auditor, where we need to go and understand this particular structural framework that is being casted here. For all this, whatever that we do, the SQC places a very, very fundamental and foundation pillar here, the standards on quality control. SQC, there is only one SQC that is so far issued, SQC1. There are other standard literatures are on the way, where this particular SQC is something very, very comprehensive, which will help the practicing unit, whether you are individually where we practice or we practice as a firm, including an LLP, to set out the policies and procedures in order to ensure that whatever that is expected from the practicing unit to be complied with. This SQC is having two different application for whatever the engagement standards that is issued by our institute. For all this, SQC will be applicable here. Usually, the engagement that is taken up by a chartered accountant or a chartered accountant firm is basically divided into two. One is something like an assurance service, the other one is a related service. Whereas the name denotes, it is an assurance that is being provided in an assurance service, which is further divided into two aspects. One is audit and a review of historical financial statements. The other one is assurance engagements, something other than audit and a review of historical financial statements, where I'm going to do an audit. I'm going to sign on the financial statements of that particular entity, whether it may be a listed entity or it may be a non-listed entity. It may not be a company at all. It may be a firm or it may be a trust, where I'm going to verify the financial statements of it, and I'm going to perform an audit, and then I'm going to express an opinion. Then I have to comply with certain set of standards in case of audit of historical financial statements have been carried out. Similarly, when I go for a review activity, not an audit activity, I'm just going to do a review, which is also considered to be an assurance engagement. There is a third set of assurance engagements, which is not relating to audit, or which is not relating to review of historical financials, something relating to future financials, or not relating to audit and review of historical financials, I may be going and I need to go and comply with certain set of again standards that is issued by ICAI here. And I'm not going to do an assurance engagement at all, sir. I'm just going to do a compilation activity, which is nothing but a mutually agreed upon procedure that I have to perform, where there is no assurance that is provided to a third party by the chartered accountant here. Then I need to do with the related services standards, which is something called as standards on related services, SRS. And when I going to perform an attest function with regard to an audit of historical financial statements, I need to comply with standards on auditing. And the moment I'm going to do a review activity, I need to comply with standards on review engagements. And the last one with regard to assurance engagements, other than audit and review, I need to go and comply with standards on assurance engagements. So why I need to comply all this? Because in order to ensure uniformity, in order to ensure comparability, and also to ensure my quality in whatever the way I perform, I need to necessarily comply with a set of standard that is what expected from the regulator also. Our institute, being the regulator of the accounting and audit profession in India, which is a member of International Federation of Accountants, which is at a global forum, where at par with international standards, we are also having similar standards at Indian scenario, which is tailor-made to that extent applicable at Indian scenario. And then we are trying to make implementing this as a mandatory perspective, so as to ensure that there is a global perspective to compare our quality at a cross-border transaction here. Because today's in Indian environment and economic scenario where there are huge foreign investments that is happening, where the foreign investor should have the confidence and the trust that is there on the Indian financial statements that is being reviewed by Indian chartered accountants, where the standards on which I do my verification function is at par with international levels. Always the credibility, always the integrity is getting enhanced, and the reliability is always placed on the work that is taken out by a chartered accountant as well here. So out of this, the moment I talk about the standards, technically we call it as standards on auditing essays, which is applicable for audit of historical financial statements. Predominantly our practice is into audit. There are certain other areas also we take up assurance activities, we take up review activities, and there are also mutually agreed upon procedures that we need to perform. All these standards are technically called as engagement standards, and for all this the mother will be standards on quality control here. For whatever activity that we do, whether we do an audit, where we do a review or an assurance or a related event, we need to maintain documentation for the same, not only for the purpose of quality control, but also to prove that I have complied with these particular standards. Because as per the regulations, as per the institute, we need to mandatorily comply with these particular standards with regard to the respective activity that we take out. Not only that, my Companies Act 2013 also imposes this responsibility. When I do an audit of financial statements, I need to necessarily comply with auditing standards as issued, as notified by the MCA here, which is nothing but those standards on auditing that is issued by the institute, which is equally applicable while doing an audit of a company, where I need to not only regulatory from the institute, but also from the MCA. It is my responsibility to comply with this particular standards. Sir, why I have to comply standards? How to prove that I have complied with these particular standards? What all these particular standards are of? We have various technical literatures that is to be taken out while to ensure our quality with regard to an opinion that I am being expressing while doing an audit, where we have standards on quality control, your accounting standards, and standards on auditing, as MPV sir was rightly pointing it out, where the institute is developing all these standards with the consideration of the financial reporting ecosystem. Considering the users of the financial statements, these particular standards are developed in such a way that the respective person, whether it is a management or those charged with governance, or from the auditor perspective at the time of preparation or at the time of verification, they comply with these aspects. Your financial reporting system has been framework has been complied with, and my verification perspective as per standards are also complied with by the auditor, so as to have a reliable financial reporting in the hands of the stakeholders here. So I need to comply with list of items. How to ensure that I need to comply with all these items? How to with lot of compliances that is put on the auditor, lot of responsibilities also that is being casted on the auditor, either by way of the Companies Act or by way of code of ethics. How a person, how a practicing professional may be in a position to ensure that he does the audit properly and also he complies this particular perspective in the right way, where audit documentation is the only answer that I have. Audit documentation of the procedures that are performed by the auditor is of critical importance. I would like to say in today's scenario, that is the only vaccination that is available to the auditors, especially to protect ourselves, because there is a huge expectation, as the previous speaker was talking about, the expectation gap, which is having lot of components in it. The contribution by the audit profession is something very, very important here, and also proving that I have taken all my reasonable care and caution while performing my audit, and to ensure that the quality and to ensure an appropriate audit opinion has been delivered. This particular documentation is come for a very, very longer way for protecting the auditor's interest. Either whether it may be a peer review, or whether it may be a NAFRA review, or it may be a quality review as by QRB, or by financial reporting. Whatever may be the review, or even an internal review that my firm wise that I am going to have, my documentation is the only resource that is going to be coming for the help of the auditor to substantiate that I have done my job with all reasonable care and caution. Right from Kingston Cotton Mill case, the expectation of the auditor was very precisely identified, especially in a fraudulent financial reporting economic scenarios, where even there are top level regulators that they even think today that why can't the auditors make it liable for detection of the frauds as well, where it is at no point of time the auditors may be responsible for detection of frauds, because that is not my ultimate objective. As per the framework, what is expected from an auditor is to provide only a reasonable assurance with regard to an audit of financial statements. I may not be in a position to detect all the frauds. That doesn't mean that I will be detecting the frauds. Assuming that in a scenario where there is a material misstatement that is there in a financial statement, where the auditor has not detected it, unfortunately, and then he has signed that particular opinion as a clean opinion, and then he has provided. At a later point of time, through various investigation or other regulation, they identified that there is a material misstatement in the financial statements. The first question shall be even not to the management of that particular entity, but to the auditors of that particular entity. What the auditors were doing, why the auditors have not detected this particular aspect. So immediately the question, the bullet is on the auditors here, where I need to prove that, dear sir, it is a fraudulent financial reporting. I have taken reasonable care and caution while doing an audit. So now the question will be, okay, prove that you have taken reasonable care and caution. On what basis I will be in a position to prove that I have done my audit with all reasonable care and caution? This is the only way out that will be coming for the help of the auditor. That is nothing but my documents. My audit documentation will come and speak that these are all the audit procedures that I have performed. These are all the extra care and caution that I have verified in this. And then this is how I have concluded. And this is why I have given this particular opinion in this particular financial statement. Nothing more than that is expected from me. The moment I am in a position to substantiate in this particular regard, I am protected, I am vaccinated. On the other hand, where I am not in a position to substantiate this to the regulators or to the investigating authorities, then in spite of the fact that I might have taken real care and caution, but without documentation, I might have done my audit with all professional care, but if at all I have not documenting the same, then I will be at a question, and there may not be any. It will be easily evident that the audit quality is something much lesser in this particular regard. With regard to the Indian practice is concerned, predominantly comprising of small and medium audit firms doing audit of small and less complex entities, where this sort of complex documenting and complex standards on quality compliance, standards on auditing compliance, and various engagement standard compliance, is it not something difficult that we need to go and face this? Is it not something very laborious for the audit firm to comply with? Maybe a generic question that may be there in the minds, but it is not. Please believe me, the way in which the standards are drafted, the way in which there are implementations that have been provided, is absolutely the way in which we do the audit. Actually, we do it in the right way. But the only point is we need to have the documentation, and we need to have the compliance with regard to each and every standard. Say, for example, there is an engagement acceptance. There is a separate standard that talks about. But whatever we generally do, we need to do, but we need to make a reference to that particular standards requirement, that I'm complying this particular requirement, make a checklist of this, and then I need to document the same so as to ensure that I do the audit as well as I document that I have done the audit in the right way here. So documentation is the only key to prove that I have taken all reasonable care and caution. Also, audit documentation provides the evidence that audit complies with standards on auditing, because an audit has to comply necessarily. It has to comply with standards on auditing, whatever may be the size and nature of that entity, maybe a corporate, maybe a non-corporate, maybe a smaller entity, larger entity, whatever may be the size and nature of that particular entity. The moment I'm taking up an audit of financial statements, necessarily I need to comply with standards on auditing. Necessarily the same has to be documented. There is no alternative, there is no substitute, there is no shortcut that is available in this particular regard. Where in this particular aspect, sir, can I have a checklist which will say yes, no, not applicable, and then will it be treated as a documentation for me? Various items, there are standard checklists and templates that are available today. Even institute has got a lot of such very good literatures that are available in that particular regard. So I will ask my audit team to go for ticking that yes, no, not applicable, yes, no, not applicable, like that. Each and every area that I verify, I will make this particular checklist documented. Will it be treated as a documentation? Answer is no. That is not the documentation that we talk about. Checklist will be an enabler. Checklist will be a tool that can be used for the auditor to ensure that you have done their job properly, but that will not be treated as a comprehensive documentation that we talk about. Even standards on auditing emphasis on this particular aspect. Even NAFRA recently in one of their audit quality review report, whether they have taken this particular aspect very specifically, whether yes or no responses will be treated as a documentation. The word document cannot be interpreted to mean mere yes or no responses to a set of questions that is prepared for the particular template. The documentation needs to have a specific reference to the facts of the case and must provide the evidence as required by the standards on auditing, is what the identification of the audit quality review report that is provided by NAFRA. Even standards on auditing very clearly say that particular aspect. Your yes or no, your mere checklist, I don't say that you need to discard the checklist. No, that is not my intention here. Your checklist will be the first step in your documentation, and that is not the only documentation that we talk about. You need to go beyond, you need to penetrate the aspects, whatever the procedures that you have performed while doing an audit, whatever the analysis that you have performed while forming a judgment in this particular regard has to be documented. Various perspective, chronologically it has to be documented, so as to prove that I have done the audit in the right way here. Where SA 230 is the standard which talks about documentation. The title by itself is like this: Audit Documentation is what the title of SA 230. Very, very beautiful and very, very simple standard out of all other standards. Very simple standard, somewhere around 16 or 17 odd paragraphs as the main requirement of this particular standard. Only 16 paragraphs. All other things are only application material here. The moment you take some, for dear learned chartered accountants, it may take some 15 minutes of time for you or 30 minutes time for you to go through this particular entire standard, get the crux of it, and we need to educate our engagement team to ensure that this particular compliance of 230 is being made in all our audit engagements. As our MPV sir was pointing out, the observations by quality review board, where there are two set of standards on auditing where the non-compliance rate is something very high. One is SQC1, that is somewhere around 26% or something like that, and the next one is SA 230, which is nothing but the documentation, and the third one is on SA 505, which is on external confirmation process. So these are all the areas where repeatedly the peer reviewers identify problems, repeatedly the quality review board identifies the problems, even NAFRA identifies the problems here. So when there is a problem, we need to go and set right that particular aspect here. So how to go and comply with this particular audit documentation? What is really expected from me? What I need to do, whether I need to do an audit or I need to do the documentation part, we need to go and understand this particular SA 230 very clearly here. What is the documentation term? What do you mean by this term, audit documentation? It's a very comprehensive term that is being defined under this particular essay by itself. There are only three definitions that they have included in this particular essay here, where it is audit documentation is the record of audit procedures performed, relevant audit evidences that are obtained, and most importantly, the conclusions that are reached by the auditor. Because audit conclusions are considered to be most important in forming an opinion. SA 700 that talks about my audit report, the way in which audit report is to be coined and the way in which audit report has to be presented. It talks about forming an opinion and expressing that particular opinion on the financial statements. How to form an opinion, first of all? forming an opinion is something very, very critical perspective, because based on the form of opinion, my output is going to be there. Whether I'm going to provide a clean opinion, whether I'm going to provide a qualified opinion, whether should I need to be an adverse or should it need to be a disclaimer of opinion, because at every audit, there is always something called as audit risk. What is this audit risk? The possibility of the auditor providing an inappropriate opinion. I quote, I emphasize this particular point, the possibility of auditor providing an inappropriate opinion when the financial statements contains material misstatements. So there is a very high possibility that the financial statements could contain material misstatements, where also there is same equal possibility that an auditor may provide an inappropriate opinion in that particular context. But the objective is something different. As stated by the standards, my objective of audit is to express an appropriate opinion rather than going and falling as an inappropriate opinion here. So I need to form a right conclusion. I need to form that particular opinion appropriately. For forming an opinion, my conclusions are playing a very vital role. For my conclusions, my audit evidences are playing a vital role. So it's like a backstep approach where we need to go and take the end point of time and then we come back, drill down, where all these aspects are something very, very important. For reporting, it is forming an opinion is important. For forming an opinion, my conclusions are important. For my conclusions, my audit evidences are important. For getting an audit evidence, my audit procedures are very, very important. So it's like this. You start with audit procedure, you get an audit evidence. Based on the audit evidence, you conclude, yes, I'm satisfied. No, I'm not satisfied. And then you form an opinion and express that particular opinion here. So it covers the entire mindset with regard to the audit approach here, where the audit procedures that you have performed, the relevant audit evidences obtained, and the conclusions that are being reached, all will be comprehensively bucketed into this particular term, something called as audit documentation, which is considered to be the most essential perspective in an audit, treated to be a backbone of audit, as we call about that. So why documentation is necessary? As I told, backbone is always necessary. It acts as an evidence that I have my plan, I have done my audit in a particular planned way. Not only that I have done my audit in the right way, but I need to comply with legal and regulatory requirements also. Say, for example, I'm doing an audit of a listed entity. Automatically, there may be an LODR regulations. Automatically, there may be a SEBI regulation. My Companies Act requirement could be there. Or the moment I'm going for an audit of a banking company, immediately my Banking Regulations Act, RBI regulations, norms, prudential norms, all will be coming and operating here. So where my audit is not only based on the way in which I perform, but also there are certain compliances to be included while doing an audit here. As the previous speaker was talking about, where you have a CARO reporting, CARO 2020 reporting, where there are set of specific questions that is casted to the auditor. It's a part of my duty, action under 143.11, where the auditor has to report on this particular CARO. So I need to necessarily comply with legal and regulatory requirements also, apart from my expression of an opinion. I may be expressing an opinion, fine, but that is apart from it, there are certain other set of responsibilities that is to be catered, including my fraud reporting 143.12, internal financial control over financial reporting opinion. I need to report on set of 143.3 questions in this particular regard. All are not associated with your audit opinion. It may be independent, but there are legal and regulatory imposition or a duty that is casted to the auditor, where I need to necessarily comply with those responsibilities as well. So in a particular case where there is a CARO requirement, where I need to specifically go and verify, and then only I may be in a position to respond to that particular answer. Say, for example, presently CARO 2016, which is equally there in CARO 2020 also, with regard to property, plant and equipment, where one of the question is whether title deeds of immovable property are only in the name of the company or not. In expressing an opinion on the audit of financial statement, I need not look into this particular perspective, even though it will be helping me to go for an audit of financial statement. It need not be necessarily to look into specifically with regard to immovable property and the title deeds are only in the name of the company or not, or whether management has carried out verification of inventory as well as PP at reasonable intervals. Is there any material discrepancies identified or not? Need not be. I need to go for these questions are relevant for exactly very relevant for forming an opinion. But these are all the specific questions that I need to go and apply. So wherever there are legal and regulatory requirements, I need to perform, I need to document that also that I have performed here. For that, audit documentation will be very, very vital tool for the auditor. Another very most critical and important aspect is this aspect. I always feel the entire seminars that whatever we conduct here is to enhance the professionalism among our fellow members. Not only that, the same impact is to be costed back to the audit engagement team, because my audit assistants, my audit engagement team is the one who actually performs the ground level activity here. In that particular regard, even though we may be aware about its importance, the audit team may not be aware about all these importance. They may not take it as important as we talk about. They may be taking it a particular verification lightly, and then they may not even perform the activity that is expected here. So we need to sensitize this particular aspect to our entire engagement team. This particular audit documentation will be helping for the engagement partners to go and review the work done by them, supervise them, assist them, and train them with regard to performance of their audit in the right way. It also acts as an evidence with regard to significant aspects, and also my audit documentation will act as a benchmark for my further audit process, for my further audits. My model audit papers, there are certain firms where they always maintain this sort of model audit papers, which will be acting as a benchmark for the others, milestone for others, so as to go and adopt the same strategy and same principles that is to be in the present audit scenario as well. And then it will also assist the quality control review or a peer review or an external inspection, even internally, where SQC 1 also talks about it, where SA 220 also talks about it, where engagement quality control review in case of a listed entity that is applicable, where one of my partner or equally competent person may come and review this particular activity, review the activity done by the engagement team, and ensure that the quality control has been maintained, like that there are requirements as per standards. For that also, this particular audit documentation will be very much helpful and necessary. And then the evidence which acts as the basis for my conclusions and reaching the overall objectives of the audit, which is nothing but to express an appropriate audit opinion. This audit documentation will be the tool for me to come and substantiate here. With regard to SA 230 is concerned, where this particular essay, every essay will be divided, the structure of the standards will be like this, because it is at international levels. The numbering also is at par with international levels, international standards on auditing here. Every essay will contain a scope, it will have its own objective, what is the intent for this particular essay, and also it will contain certain technical terms as definitions. And the main heart of this particular essay will be on the requirement part. One important point that we need to learn here is standards on auditing will always speak only to the auditors. It doesn't do anything with regard to the management or those charged with governance or audit committee, as the case may be. Where standards on auditing speaks to the auditor what you have to do in order to handhold him to ensure that he is doing that particular activity in the right way here. So the requirement part of a standard will be considering the audit procedures to be performed, and also the various requirements that is casted to the auditor to fulfill his obligations in this particular regard. I need to take this particular requirement portion seriously. I need to comply with each and every requirement of that particular essay wherever it is applicable, wherever the situation is applicable for my audit. And lastly, you have a paragraphs starting with alphabet A, which will be nothing but an application guidance, A1, A2, A3, A4, like that. The paragraphs will be numbered here, for which will provide explanatory and applicatory guidance for implementation of that particular standard. Apart from it, there are certain implementation guides also issued for these standards for effective implementation of this. ICAI takes enormous pleasure in reducing this particular activity. They take lot of study in this particular regard, research will be done, and then only they will be issuing this particular documents, including the implementation guide here. When you take this particular standard, there are three important requirements where we need to have a mention here. The time with which your audit documentation has to be prepared, the manner in which your audit documentation is to be prepared, and the time period with which it is to be retained. Like that, you have the assembly activity, including the retention activity, all are very specifically talked in this particular standard. Let us go and take, let us spend some half an hour's time in this particular regard, and also we will be moving on to the audit tools that that practically that could be possible, and various other impact of other work-related area in our regular practice can also be taken up here. Let us go for this particular essay 230 scope. What is this jurisdiction? What the essay talks about? It talks about the auditor's responsibility to prepare audit documentation. It is not out of my own interest I prepare documentation. It is a responsibility that is casted by the standards on auditing to prepare this particular documentation here. So mandatorily, I need to go and comply with this particular essay here. So as to ensure that I am preparing the audit documentation in the right way. Legal and regulatory requirements may impose additional documentation requirement that will not, this particular essay will not override that particular requirements here. So wherever there are legal and regulatory requirements which wants the auditor to go for specific verification and specific communication as a financial reporting or to the regulators, say for example, your 143.12 of the Companies Act wants the auditor to go for specific verification with regard to offences involving frauds, and the information is brought to the auditor's notice that is to be communicated to the management as well as to the central government with regard to where a fraud involving rupees 1 crore or more individually, I need to communicate to the central government as well. So in that particular case where there is a legal and regulatory requirement which poses a specific responsibility where I need to document, I need to go and comply, this particular essay will not override that. This will be in supplementary to that particular requirement. Your essay will continue. Specific documentation requirements of other essays do not impose restriction on this particular essay. There are a lot of, every essay will have a interjunction with regard to other essays. Each essays are supplementary to each other here. All the essays are designed in such a way that one essay's impact could be there automatically falling on the other essay here. So there are separate essays which may want separate aspects to be documented by the auditor. That has to be documented. This is not a substitute for it. And with regard to smaller entities, audit of small and less complex entities, you need not go for a comprehensive documentation as that is required for a larger enterprises here. There are certain relaxations that is also provided. Technically, we call this as a scalability, where you may scale up and scale down in this particular regard, but the core functionality will remain same here. But there are certain relaxations that is provided for audit of small and less complex entities, technically here called as smaller entities here. Let us go and understand what are all the relaxations also available for audit of small and less complex entities as well. The objective of the audit with regard to SA 230 is concerned, the objective of the auditor is to prepare documentation that provides sufficient and appropriate record of the basis of the auditor's report. So it is for expressing an opinion, I need to require sufficient and appropriate audit evidence for forming an opinion, expressing that particular opinion. But in order to have documentation perspective, it is to have a sufficient and appropriate record so as to prove that I have taken right cautious aspects with regard to audit report is concerned. Not only that, my compliance of legal and regulatory front is also been taken up perfectly here. Evidence that the audit was planned and performed in accordance with standards on auditing and legal and regulatory requirements here. When you talk about a peer review, say for example, sir, I'm doing private limited companies. Now I want to do an audit of a listed entity here. So one of the condition as per LODR regulation is in order to carry out an audit of a listed entity audit, you need to get yourself a peer review certificate. So what this peer reviewer will come and do my verification, the first and foremost aspect that the peer reviewer will come for my verification will be whether are you having documentation to prove that you are complying with standards on auditing, you are complying with legal and regulatory requirements, you are complying with technical literatures that are required to be complied, is what with regard to every assurance engagement that I take up, whether you are in a position to give me a convincing aspect in this regard will be the verification point from the peer reviewer's perspective. So we need to necessarily comply with these standards as well as legal and regulatory requirements here. The term audit file is different from the term audit documentation. Audit documentation will be of a macro level, which is a comprehensive term. Audit file is into a micro level here. One or more folders or even other storage media in physical as well as in an electronic form. This gives confidence for us to go and have audit documentation even in an electronic media, in an electronic methodology, that is also permitted. Because now having information technology era, where everywhere you have the use of information technology and there are automations that have been happening, where my audit documentation, should it be only in a physical form? Should I need to take a printout? Should it be signed? Should it be kept in a physical file? where you go paperless office, where's the course of having a physical item, where my SQC permits, my SA 500 also permits in this particular regard, even my SA 230 also permits to go in an information technology adoption, even because Information Technology Act also enables this particular activity here. Again, my Companies Act section 128 also permits the books of accounts can be maintained in electronic form here. So it all information technology. Without that, today's audit environment, considering the complexities and volumes in which the data is being processed, so electronic form of files shall also be permitted, which is also part of my audit file here. It may contain the records that comprise audit documentation for a specific engagement. I need to have my audit file, which is also called as audit work papers or audit working papers, as the name denotes. Out of the 3 requirements of this particular standard, the first requirement of this particular standard is the time with which your audit documentation has to be prepared. So when I have to prepare, usually the problem that I'm encountering with regard to the Indian firms is, we may be taking 100% care and caution while performing the audit, and we actually lack in this particular documentation perspective, but however we know its importance. So usually what is happening in an audit firm will be, after completion of an audit, I will allocate a week's time for the audit engagement team who was involved in that particular audit. Next 3 days, 4 days after signing of the audit report, you don't have any other work. You will not be assigned to other activities also. Please sit and do all audit documentation properly, is what a regular instruction that could be given by the audit manager also to the engagement team, to ensure that my audit file is properly kept, so that my audit documentation has been kept properly. Strictly speaking, this is not the right way of doing an audit documentation. Whether we do it within the 3 days time or not, that's a different story here. There are other challenges that could be faced. The person who may be involved in the audit engagement may be going on an examination leave, or may be deputed to other engagement, or could be on an outstation engagement. What he will do is, he will just substitute his subordinate to do the activity, and then he say tata bye bye in this regard. At a later point of time, we may not have the expected outcome of this particular activity here. But strictly speaking, after completing my audit, I need to sit for my audit documentation is not the right methodology. It is not advisable as well. My standards on auditing suggest that my audit report shall be, my audit documentation shall be made on a timely basis, more or less as and when parallelly while doing the audit process, immediately I need to go for a documentation as well, so as to ensure a proper review by the audit manager or by the audit engagement partner with regard to the audit work that is being carried out, or wherever improvements that are required, wherever there are misstatements that could be possible, or wherever there are variances that are identified during the audit that can be explored further, that can be verified further with alternative audit procedures as well here. So the audit documentation or the audit files that are prepared parallelly along with the audit procedures will be definitely enhancing the audit qualities. And moreover, the audit documentation that are prepared after my audit is considered to be somewhat less accurate than that one which is prepared parallelly here. This is first perspective with regard to the timing with which audit documentation has to be done. The second requirement of this particular standard is the most important requirement out of all the 3. The manner of your preparation of your audit documentation. On what basis I have to prepare my audit documentation? There is one beautiful analogy that they have incorporated here. They have incorporated a deeming notion in this particular regard, how your audit documentation should be, the manner of your preparation. They have, at the time of deliberating this particular essay 230, they are having one deeming notion that there will be someone called as experienced auditor. Who is that experienced auditor? A person who is having all knowledge about audit, all knowledge about the business environment and the accounting involved and the issues that could be arising through audit. He may be treated as an experienced auditor who is not part of my audit engagement team. So an experienced auditor is sitting. If at all I give my audit documentation file to him, he should be in a position to be enabled to understand the nature, timing and extent of audit procedures that you have applied, the audit evidences that you have obtained, the audit conclusions and the judgments that you have made, and the appropriateness of the audit opinion that you have provided is to be evident by going through your audit documentation for that particular experienced auditor. This is what the expectation of the standard. That is nothing but, in a simpler term, your files, audit files should be speaking files. It should not go, and you need not go and explain further. This is what I have performed. This is what that I have planned. This is how there was a deviation. This is how I have solved. Nothing to be explained. Your audit documentation should speak. This is what enabling an experienced auditor criteria here. Please understand, auditors should prepare audit documentation. It's a requirement that is casted by SA. The auditor shall prepare the audit documentation that is sufficient to enable an experienced auditor having no previous connection with regard to that particular audit assignment to understand the nature, timing, and extent of audit procedures that you have performed. What is the nature of your procedure? What is the extent and what time you have performed your audit procedure? How you have evaluated these audit procedures are to be performed. Please understand, as per SA 315, which is another wonderful standard that talks about identifying and understanding the risk of identifying and assessing the impact of risk of material misstatement by understanding the entity and its environment, including its internal control. So I need to necessarily identify the risk of material misstatement, not only identify the risk of material misstatement, but also to assess its impact, so as to ensure my audit responses in such a way that I am performing my audit procedures and getting my audit evidences, which will be enabling me to form an opinion, express an opinion in this regard. So my understanding of the entity and its environment, including its internal control, will give a very larger perspective of understanding with regard to the risk of material misstatement. It is nothing but a KYC, know about your customer, knowledge about the client's business, which will be a very core factor for me to plan my audit, perform my audit areas, identify significant materially misstated areas or risk-prone zones can be easily analyzed by the auditor in this particular regard. Accordingly, based on that particular identification, that is something called as risk assessment procedures that is to be performed by the auditor. Based on that particular risk assessment procedure, I will be drafting my strategy of my audit, and accordingly, I will be planning my audit, which includes the nature, timing, and extent of my audit procedures to be performed. Say, for example, in a real estate company, the accounting system by itself may be inherently materially misstated because of huge estimates that are being done, huge amount of judgments that could be involved in even your revenue recognition for that particular matter. So in that particular case, my risk assessment is something on this, where my revenue recognition is a risk prone area. So in that particular case, I need to go and focus more on that particular area. My audit planning should be, my audit program will be drafted in such a way that I put my substantial efforts on this particular significant area here, where there could be likelihood of material misstatement. So my documentation should be in such a way that my nature, timing, and extent of audit procedures that I have performed has to be documented, which will enable the experienced auditor to understand how you have decided this. Not only that, the results of audit procedures that I have performed and the evidences that I have obtained should be speaking. And lastly, the significant professional judgments that have been made by the auditor, because your mere expression, truth and fairness by itself involves auditor's professional judgment. Your true and fair view is not defined anywhere. What is true and fair is not defined either in standards or in accounting standards or in standards on auditing or even in Companies Act. It is absolutely based on the judgment of the auditor here. So on what basis you have concluded something, you are treating it as a material and something it is not a material? Because as an auditor, I am always bothered about material misstatement and not every mistake. On what basis you are setting this as a material context, where how you are applying your benchmarking, your materiality, your performance materiality? On what basis you are going and concluding this is acceptable, this is reasonable or not, wherever there are estimates that are being made by the management, whether these particular disclosures are adequate or inadequate? On what basis you are concluding? All these are all a part of my audit procedure that I will be normally carrying it out. Not only that as an audit procedure, but also as a documentation that I need to capture so as to have this particular audit file, which will enable my experienced auditor to satisfy himself. Sir, is it necessary that the SA says that I need to give this file to every enabling experienced auditor? No, that is not the condition here. It should be prepared in such a way that your experienced auditor should be in a position to understand this. So even NAFRA, when they go for audit quality review, they don't ask this file, that file and all. Say, for example, where an income tax assessment is taken up or a GST audit is being taken up, where the assessing officer will be requiring some 10 to 15 statements. You need to prepare this revenue statement, you need to prepare this reconciliation, that reconciliation, and then you need to give like that. They will be asking for some 10 to 15 documents or statements to be given for the purpose of enabling them to do the audit. NAFRA doesn't want all this. They want only one file from you. Please provide audit documentation file. Over. That itself is all comprehensive here. They need not ask what is your audit plan, how you have performed, how many days that you have identified, how you have identified the risk assessment process, how you have concluded this is right or not. No questions on this. You provide your audit documentation file, we will take care. That's it. So that is the expectation from the standards with regard to the documentation is concerned. Is it, sir, this is not an imposition on us, how you expect us to do and prepare like this. Please understand, if all the aspects that is actually we are performing that. The point is, it is not that we don't perform, we actually perform, but the only disadvantage what we have today in Indian context is we don't document the way in which it has performed here. The moment we are in a position to do it, all will be taken care automatic. Say for example, 8 hours of your article assistant who is coming and working here. So please allocate your timing in such a way that 7 hours you verify, 1 hour you document whatever you verify. That's it. Very simple. The moment it may be something treated as a difficult aspect in the initial stages. Once it is adopted, once you start training to our audit team, making its importance, automatically my audit documentation will be on the flow. Anything that is at the initial period will be of difficulty here. The moment we are in a position to rightly understand its impact, it's all not to make the auditor in a disadvantageous position, but to ensure that the auditor is protected. So we are from my perspective, I always used to tell this, we are protecting the client's interests, we are protecting the shareholders' interests, we are protecting as an auditor, we are protecting the revenue government's interest also by ensuring that my client is paying appropriate taxes and also complying with all regulatory respect in this aspect. We are protecting the bankers, lenders' interest in this particular regard. When we are trying to protect everybody else, who will come for our protection when there is a question on the auditor's quality? There is no other external person can come for our protection here. It is only my own audit documentation which will come for my protection here. That is what that I told you, that this is the only vaccination that is available to ensure that you are being protected here. So my experienced auditor criteria is an important criteria that is to be enabled, that is to be satisfied by the auditor while preparing this particular documentation. Who is this experienced auditor here? This is what another definition that they have provided for. It could be an individual, whether internal or external to the firm, having equal competence, having practical audit experience and a reasonable understanding of audit process that is to be performed, the standards on auditing and applicable legal and regulatory requirements, because each client, the legal and regulatory requirements will be different. The financial reporting framework will be differing from client to client. So you need to understand the applicable financial reporting framework and the business environment with which the client operates and auditing and financial reporting issues. He should be a person of integrity and reasonable amount of knowledge with regard to the audit areas. That person will be treated as an experienced auditor, where we need to deem that there is a person who is sitting like this, and then our audit documentation has to be prepared in such a way that if I give this documentation to him, he will be understanding the entire process workflow, is what the expectation, and that is what the way in which we need to prepare our audit documentation here. Very, very important perspective here. It is to be satisfied. Very many places the auditor's judgments are involved, which involves very critical perspective that is to be documented here. Matters that give rise to significant risk, where it may be because of your inherent risk or control risk that are associated with regard to material misstatements, could be either through frauds or errors here, where audit procedures that indicate material misstatements, how you are dealing with that, how I am communicating the same to the management and those charged with governance, because SA 450 specifically talks about where if at all I identified a misstatements during the audit, I need to consider whether it is material or not, or whether it is trivial. In case of trivial, I need not do anything. When the moment it is material, that itself is an indicator that there is an internal control weakness, because the client's financial reporting allows middle misstatements to happen. So I need to go for an extended audit procedures. My plans has to be revised. That is on one end. But on the other end, I need to communicate to the management for its correction. the previous session where the MPV sir was talking about. He was talking about uncorrected misstatements, effect of uncorrected misstatements. Exactly, ESA 450 talks about that. The moment I am communicating the material misstatements that are identified during the course of audit, and I'm communicating to the management for its correction. When the management accepts it and then he passes the entries, all will be called as audit accounting entries. No problem for me. The material misstatements are getting corrected now. But still there is a problem with regard to the internal control that will be taken up separately. But the point will be severe when the management is not accepting the points that is raised by the auditor. When the auditor wants to correct a particular statement, and the management says no, it is right, I need not go for correcting this particular item, then it will be treated as an uncorrected material misstatement. Now, what will be the effect of this uncorrected material misstatement on the entire financial statements? So is it going to be material considering the financial statement as a whole or not? If it is yes, then I need to go and have a modified opinion only. In that particular scenario, at no point of time I cannot go with a clean opinion. I need to necessarily go for a modified opinion as per SA 705. Either I may go for a qualified, adverse, or even a disclaimer based on the pervasiveness of the material statements and the audit evidence that I am having on my hand. So how I have deduced to this particular conclusion has to be documented wherever they indicate a material misstatement here. Or there could be circumstances that could be leading to difficulty in applying my audit procedures. SA 260 specifically talks about this. Difficulties faced by the auditor during the audit has to be necessarily communicated. Usually my normal audit procedures by itself will be giving me sufficient appropriate audit evidence. But here in a different situation, I'm extended audit procedures have been performed, still I'm not in a position to have sufficient appropriate audit evidence. That may indicate there may be someone who is holding back that particular information, or there may be non-cooperation by the management, or there could be possibility of restriction in the scope of audit, or there could be lack of provision of information to the auditor. I may be asking this particular data. The client may say, sir, I will update and give, like that. There are dragging of that particular issues could also happen without conclusion that is being made or without providing the right documentation to the auditor. All these aspects may be treated as a significant difficulties that are faced by the auditor, which is to be documented and also to be communicated as required by other standards. Possible situations for modifications to an audit opinion, as I told you, where there is a modified opinion that I'm going to provide, where I identify a material misstatements here as per SA 705. It is considered to be material. I need to go for a modified opinion here, and a basis for my modified opinion should also be given. Very importantly, as per SA 700, before its revision, we have now a revised SA 700. Before its revision, where we need to go and provide an opinion, and before opinion paragraph, we need to also provide a basis of opinion paragraph in case of a modified opinion. Now, under revised SA 700, whether you are going for a clean opinion or a modified opinion, whether you say true and fair view is there or true and fair view is not there, or subject exceptions, still you need to go and provide a basis of opinion here. That is mandatory, how you are going and concluding. So especially with regard to a modified opinion, necessarily I need to incorporate that particular basis of modified opinion paragraph, basis of qualified opinion paragraph, on what basis I'm concluding, what prompted me to go for this particular opinion has to be provided back to the shareholders. Since it is a requirement that is to be reported to the shareholders, mandatorily I need to document so as to convince to the regulators that this is the reason that I'm going for a modified opinion here. Other significant matters that requires documentation includes wherever there are subjective decisions that could be made, including very importantly with regard to going concern, which is very subjective in nature, especially in today's pandemic environment, where a foreseeable feature may not be forecasted at all. What is going to happen tomorrow may not be in a position to go for. Fortunately, thank God, now there are certain economic operations that is gearing up, and we are in a position to have some sort of light in this particular regard. But especially during pandemic time, where there are a lot of disruptions, economic disruption that could happen. So, which is where going concern assessment, the basis of your preparation of financial statements by itself is under a huge question, which is subjective in nature, where the management has to assess, auditor has to evaluate about the appropriateness of the management's assessment in this regard. All these are all very subjective in nature, which is to be specifically documented because of the fact that it is subjective here. the basis of conclusion with regard to the authenticity of a document whenever that is in a case of a doubt, like application of SA 500 that talks about the relevance and the reliability of a particular audit evidence. Here, when SA 701 applies, as rightly preambled by the previous speaker here, where he has rightly pointed out with regard to the key audit matter, which is a new development that is all happening, where liquidation of key audit matter should not be there in my audit report. Rather, I need to identify the most significant aspects, whatever that I have already communicated to those charged with governance and management, which I feel that is to be presented to the shareholders so as to add value to the criticality and complexities that are involved while doing an audit, and the audit procedures that are appropriately applied by the auditor. I need to necessarily include this particular point as per SA 701. I need to also parallelly document the fact on what basis I am considering this as a key audit matter, and if at all I am dropping a particular issue, on what basis I am dropping, why I am dropping. That is also to be documented for the purpose of reporting as per 701 here. SA 701 key audit matter reporting is, as on today, is applicable for a listed entity. For other entities also, if the auditor wants to include, he is open to that. He may go for including that as an audit report here. Specific aspects that is mandatory to be documented here is discussion with the audit engagement team, which promotes right audit culture, because the audit engagement team, who are the actual one who does the audit, they may come out with the audit management or the audit team or the engagement partner. These are all the audit findings. These are all the unresolved queries, or these areas they have not provided the document, they are providing only to the partners. Like that, there are a lot of discussions that could happen with the audit engagement team, including related party transactions, the precautions to be taken up while verifying the related party transactions, subsequent events that are happening after the date of the audit balance sheet, how I am going to address that. All these are all a part of my discussion with the team that is to be documented, and also discussions that are made with the management, including those charged with governance, the date, timing, the person responsible for that particular discussion. Say, for example, the audit committee chairman or the CFO with whom I made that particular discussion, the documentation of the same, the outcome of that, maybe a minutes, could be of huge help for the auditor to substantiate that this particular aspect has been already covered or already deliberated while doing an audit, and this is the cautious judgment that I have made. My auditor's judgment by itself is a very careful and cautious decision that is made, the course of action that is taken up in the matter that I am going for. It is not an unknown decision that I have taken. I know what is the repercussion of it, and then there is a serious application of the thought process, and then based on the experience and the technical literature that is available, the best course of action that I am taking as my auditor's judgment. So there is an omission or there is an inclusion is not out of any other incidental activity, but it is a purposeful activity that we have considered like this, where it is to be demonstrated through your documentation. In case of departure with regard to the requirement of standards on auditing, which is not normal, but whenever there is a departures, I am permitted to perform an alternative audit procedures here. Even in a place where I am not in a position to alternate audit procedures are not applicable, in that particular case, I need to necessarily document the fact, which is treated as a generally accepted audit procedure. My standards on auditing are called as generally accepted audit procedure, which is also a part of my professional misconduct. While doing an attest function, when my generally accepted audit procedures are not complied with, it will be treated as guilty of my professional misconduct in the Schedule 2 of Part 1 of Schedule 2 of CA Act. So I need to be very clear in documenting the fact of that as well. Matters arising after the date of auditor's report, application of SA 560, which is by itself is a wonderful area for deliberations. All these are all the aspects to be specifically documented here, apart from the respective SA's requirement to document aspects here. With regard to smaller entities, as I talk about, there are scalability, there are certain relaxations that is provided in the standard by itself, that audit documentation for audit of smaller and lesser complex entities are generally less extensive than that for the audit of a larger entity here. No documentation requirement for the team discussions that are made by the engagement partner or whatever the supervision area that I have done, because the client by itself, there may be a one-man person where I will send one article to complete that particular private limited company or very smaller entity where there is no specific team discussions and all that are being made. There is no supervision specifically that are explicitly done so as to have a documentation perspective. That need not be required here. There is a relaxation that they have provided here. But very interestingly and importantly, the experienced auditor criteria with regard to your audit filing is mandatorily retained here. So there is no compromise on the experienced auditor criteria with regard to audit file and audit documentation manner is concerned. That is necessarily to be complied with. By the way, what do you mean by smaller entities here? SA by itself provides the definition also, where concentration of the ownership or with regard to the management in a small number of people, say for example, husband and wife, brothers, sisters, they go for this particular company, a closely held company like that, where there may be a concentration with regard to very fewer people and also very straightforward transactions. There is no so much of complexities that are involved in the financial statements which is going to be audited, which is a straightforward, simple record keeping, few lines of business, few internal controls that are required, few personnel doing this particular activities, all will be having the characteristics of a smaller entity where there are lesser requirements to go for it. But very importantly, two constant factors that is always to be applied in any audit for that particular matter is auditor's professional judgment and professional skepticism. Without professional judgment and professional skepticism, your audit is not at all complete. Or two eyes of the auditor, or two constant factors with regard to audit of any type of organization, these two will come and operate. Professional judgment is nothing but making informed decisions by the auditor. That is the best in the course of action with the help of my experience, my wisdom, my literature, technical literatures that are available. And professional skepticism, which is an important term, which is deliberated globally. Everywhere we have discussion on this particular term, professional skepticism, which is nothing but the attitude of an auditor having a questioning mind. Very importantly, there is a clarity and distinction between a suspicious mind and a questioning mind. Auditor is not believed to be a suspicious person. I am always a skeptical person. I'm always be having a questioning mind, and then having a critical assessment of my own audit evidences and being alerted to indicators that could indicate possibilities of misstatements while doing an audit of financial statements, which may be due to errors or frauds. All these are all the characters that can be attributed to this particular professional skepticism, which is in other way called as having reasonable care and caution. What is expected from an auditor is only reasonable assurance. That is nothing but having reasonable care and caution that are appropriate in the circumstances. That is nothing but exercise of professional skepticism. That may not be in a position to be documented. I may not demonstrate my professional skepticism through my documentation, but through my audit procedures, I may be in a position to demonstrate that. That is required for an auditor here, either in a smaller entity and also in a large complex entity here. The third requirement part with regard to the timing with which or the assembly of final audit file, within what time you need to complete this particular assembly. Please understand, it is not preparation of audit file, it is only assembly of audit file. My preparation of audit file, my audit documentation has to happen parallelly as and when I do the audit, but the assembly of the same can be having with a time limit. After my audit is completed, there is a time limit of 60 days time is being provided by SQC1, Standards on Quality Control. So within such time, I need to go and compile and consolidate all my audit files in a logical sequential way so as to enable the experienced auditor criteria. It's also considered here. Set of policy of documentation as per SQC1. Please don't underestimate the potentiality of SQC. Standards on Quality Control is considered to be the most essential. It is deemed to be always be maintained by every practicing unit here. SQC compliance is considered to be most important, which also sets out the time limit also. The time limit for assembly of final audit file shall not be more than 60 days after the date of auditor's report, with which I need to assemble that and then I need to make ready over. That's it. Thereafter, I may not be in a position to delete a particular item from that particular audit documentation. If at all I want to include certain further documents because of latest information that has been brought in, that can be ordered, but with a reason why that particular final audit file has been touched upon. How long this particular audit files has to be retained, which is also another question here, which is previously was 10 years, and the council has reduced that particular 10 years to 7 years timeline here. They need to retain, the practicing units has to retain the audit documentation for a minimum period of 7 years from the date of auditor's report here. That where if you see GST law, the company, the taxable person has to maintain that particular accounts for a period of 72 months. With regard to Companies Act is concerned, where section 128 talks about the books of accounts has to be maintained for a period of 8 preceding financial years. That is not the criteria that we need to bother about from the auditor's perspective. For the audit documentation, audit working papers, my permanent audit file, current audit file, all these files are concerned, I need to maintain it for a minimum period of 7 years, is what the retention timeline that they have talked about. This 60 days timeline with which I need to compile my financial assembly of audit file is also linked now with my UDIN generation. There is a relaxation, recent relaxation that is provided by the institute here with regard to generating that particular UDIN, unique identification document identification number in the UIDN portal is also as set out at 60 days time because of this SQC1 and SA230's requirement. The necessity to generate the UDIN within 15 days, within 30 days and all is relaxed now, where you have a comfortable 60 days timeline with which you can complete that particular entire process here. Never to say that audit documentation is always the property of the auditor here, where legally I need to have this ownership here. As pointed out exactly by MPV sir, these are all the weaknesses that are usually identified by the peer reviewer as well as quality review. My audit documentation is not proper. SA230 non-compliance is very high. No practice manual or quality review manual maintained. Again, SQC1 not maintained. These are all the reasons for us to go for a robust mechanism. So your audit quality maturity model and all are just a venture by the institute so as to ensure that these particular aspects are being improved by the practicing professionals here. Management representation letters not taken. My SA 580 is not complied with. Written communication to those charged with governance are not issued. My SA 260 talks about this communication. Sorry. My SA 265 also talks about this particular identification of internal control deficiencies communication. My SA 701 also talks about those communicated items have to be included here. My SA 210 talks about agreeing the terms of engagement with regard to the client. All these are all the areas where we communicate, keep on to the management during the process of audit. That particular process is not proper because of non-compliance of standards on auditing is one of the identification here. Technical standards that is expected to be followed are not followed, which is the core content of SA is also the core content of peer review is also not followed is what some of the observations here. That's why you have audit quality maturity model here. That's what the previous speaker was rightly pointing it out, where we have an attempt to ensure that these three pillar areas are being concentrated by the people here, where your practice management, your HR related item, including infrastructures, practice management related item, which includes audit tool also. My perspective here is not to go and deliberate on this particular maturity model, where our Central Council member has very detailedly analyzed the entire provisions here. My take here with regard to audit documentation, I'm trying to link somewhat with regard to helping the practicing professionals. How your audit documentation has to be coined or has to be strategically prepared in such a way that I'm also getting scores in my AQM. How to go for it, where you have workflow practice manuals, you have 16 points. Where you have quality review manuals or audit tools engagement, where you have 24 points. Where you have quality control, there's nothing but SQC1 operation policies and procedures that are to be implemented and monitored, where you have 80 bulk points. Sorry. All these are all the areas which are specifically linked to the documentation perspective, and also resource planning and monitoring as per firm's policy. First of all, firm's policy has to be documented. Sorry here. Unless I document my firm's policy, which is as per standards on quality control, I may not be in a position to plan, I may not be in a position to monitor or effectively implement here. So all these are all the areas where we need to have a relook, a redefine or unlearn whatever that we have learned, and then have a fresh look of it, and then we may be in a position to apply it appropriately here, including infrastructure related aspects, which includes practice management, which includes a digital library, which will help the knowledge sharing to my engagement team, so as to enable the engagement team to perform in line with the requirements of the standards here. Here the rule of audit tools comes to play. The role of audit tool is maybe today's technological environment may at a point of time which will become inevitable here. Generally, a wrong conception with regard to audit tool is we always considered that audit tool is always a automated computerized tool is what audit tool is. That is not the way. Even international standards on auditing also talks about the guidelines they have provided for. Audit tool need not be only in an automated environment. It could be even a manual, sophisticated helping aid, which is enabling the auditor to perform the audit, can even be treated as an audit tool, but includes an automated one anyways. Audit procedures can be performed using a number of tools or techniques, which can be manual or even automated, and often a combination of both. Predominantly, the automated tool, which is the order of the day, because 100% of the clients are maintaining their books of accounts in an electronic way, and then I am going in a computerized environment. I do my entire audit. Sorry, the primitive way of going for a ledgers, papers, and all are now gone. Now we are entirely moving to a computerized environment. Especially after COVID, you need not even go for physically to go and see that particular client's place. Sitting at our place, we may be in a position to have access. There are remote access. There are technology servers, database that could be enabling you to sit at your place and do the audit effectively. That is also possible. So practitioners may use various terms in practice to describe the tools, which includes automated tools, substantive tools, or ratio analytical tools that could also be performed by the auditor to have risk assessment that is also possible because of the volume in the data with which I'm going to do an audit. Today, my technology has changed the way in which business are being operated. And because of the technology that is involved, the volume of the business operation is something very high. The number of transactions that are happening is something very huge. It may not be possible for me to go in a manualized way of verification. So computerized verification and an automated audit tools will be helping me to pull out those particular data extraction from the servers or from the database that are the accounting softwares that are being used by the client, and then from their application software, I may be in a position to do an data extraction. I may be doing an analysis. My audit software could be used, or my simple spreadsheets could be used, or my audit programs can be applied there, so as to identify certain exceptional areas, so as to identify certain variances, or certain fluctuations in which is expected, or a risk assessed item can be propped up. Like that, we may be in a position to perform my audit procedures in an effective manner whenever I have an audit tool which is for my help here. As someone was talking about, even there was a question with regard to ICAI's role in audit tool. Actually, as MP sir was pointing it out, where they have 4 specific items that the institute is targeting now, where there should be an audit documentation tool. For audit documentation, there should be a tool that is to be provided to my fraternity, so as to enable all the documentation perspective with regard to complaints are being made by me. Audit analytical tools with regard to the data, with regard to the client, with regard to the procedures that are to be performed has to be enabled. Digital library, which will enable my knowledge perspective for my engagement team as well as my practice, and also practice management tool, which includes my administrative perspective, my time sheets, my capturing the data, my time involved, and then billing and communicating effectively to the client, communicating effectively to my audit team, all can be of our administrative, including practice management tool. Even SIRC is trying to have a practice management tool for all the participants of the regional conference. It's a very good initiative that is taken up by the chairman of SIRC and other office bearers. It's a very interesting aspect where the practice management is being provided so as to enable my to go for a right practice here. All these are all under the pipeline where the time has to answer with what time they may be in a position to provide. Why this will be important in my AQMM is because when I use a tool, when I use an quality review manuals, there are points that will be provided here, and also which will enable me incidentally to comply with the standards on auditing requirements also. Say for example, whether the client acceptance engagement, that checklist has been prepared, where a required documentation has been done for this or not. It's nothing but an SA 210's exact requirement, agreeing with the terms of an audit engagement, where I go for an engagement letter. Before acceptance of engagement acceptance, I need to go for a communication to the previous auditor, where there are Companies Act requirements to be complied with. Sorry. All these processes are to be compiled in particular way so as to ensure that I don't miss out anything. I do my audit in the right way is what the intention behind this particular model here, where availability of standard checklists with regard to performance of an audit for compliance with accounting as well as auditing standards. For your kind information, AASB has brought out a beautiful checklist standards on auditing wise, what are all the areas that is to be concentrated by the practicing professional, which will be definitely helpful for the engagement team, so as to enable the right aspect of verification. We may be in a position to use it. I have also given the reference of the resource, the literature that is available for free download by the members here. Practical aspects, I'll just take some another 5 minutes time for have this particular aspect with regard to compliance. There, where say for example, I just take up an audit where pre-audit correspondence there is a requirement, appointment letter there is a requirement, consent letter that is to be obtained from the from the previous auditor, and also my consent letter to the entity is also a requirement, including a Companies Act requirement. I need to communicate with regard to the previous auditor. Please take it from us where the disciplinary cases, 70% of the disciplinary cases are because of this particular point. My communication with the previous auditor was not appropriate, or I'm not in a position to prove that I have communicated to the previous auditor, and the disciplinary matter has been raised by the previous auditor. So this creates a lot of problems. So these are all the areas where we need to focus, where we need to go and ensure that we are doing that particular audit in the right way. The letter of confirmation as per SA 505, representations from the management which is on SA 580, corresponding concerning matters, significant matters including fraud, SA 240, SA 260, significant audit difficulties, 265, significant internal control deficiencies that are identified, key audit matters 701. All these are all having a specific requirement of documentation to be done in this regard. Just to take up an example of engagement acceptance, sir, there is a private limited company. It's not a listed company also. Just a private limited company wants me to appoint as an auditor. So can I take up the audit? Yes, you can take up the audit very much. That is the bread of our function. We may very much take up that particular audit, provided we take also compliance in this particular regard. Before jumping into providing an acceptance and taking up the audit and doing the audit aspects, we need to parallelly do this particular documentation of compliance as well. For all the documentation perspective, first one is proposal for this particular audit should be from the client. They have to go and come and approach, because I cannot solicit work. And the second one is consent and eligibility letter as per the Companies Act has to be provided. I need to have documentation in this particular regard. I need to first of all give a consent. Yes, I am willing to take up the audit. If at all I have been appointed, I am not disqualified from any of the disqualification under the Companies Act. The terms are within the numbers, the ceiling limit are there. I may be in a position to take up like that. I need to provide a consent letter. Sir, all these are all important, or whether client acceptance is important. You do accept it. I don't deny on that particular fact, but parallelly do this particular documentation as well is what the caution that we are trying to make here. Appointment of the auditor by after following the right compliance by the Companies Act in this particular case. Say for example, assuming that there is a casual vacancy, the casual vacancy cannot be just like that filled up. The casual vacancy has to be filled up within a timeline, 30 days timeline. And then if the casual vacancy is on account of a resignation of the previous auditor, then the shareholders approval for the same within 90 days to be there. These are all very important aspects of documentation. I need to ensure whether my appointment is appropriate or not. What will happen if an inappropriate appointment is being made and I am accepting the assignment in this particular case? It will be treated as a professional guilty, where you have clause 8, where I need to communicate to the previous auditor, ensure that the communication reaches the previous auditor, wait for a reasonable time, and then to take up the audit assignment. Otherwise, I'll be guilty of my professional misconduct as per clause 8 of part 1 of the schedule. If at all my appointment by itself is not valid, say for example, the previous order was not removed properly, or a requisite resolutions in the AGM was not properly made for my appointment. In that particular case, where for default of my verification, where for accepting that particular audit without verifying whether my appointment is appropriate or not, I will be guilty of my professional misconduct as per clause 9 of part 1 of the schedule here. All these are all having an impact on my professional practice here. So I need to necessarily ensure that I am communicating, that I am complying, and I am also documenting the fact here. The sender must ensure that the recipient receives this particular communication here. There may be possibilities, sir, whether a tax audit should I need to do it, whether for an internal audit also should I need to communicate. Answer is yes. All types of audit which is previously held by a chartered accountant in practice is to be made a mandatory compulsory communication here. Even GST audit, where statutory audit or a concurrent audit, even concurrent audit in a bank, or even a branch or statutory audit in a branch where you have been appointed. In that particular case also, you need to communicate to the previous auditor. Say for example, the bank gives a very short timeline. Within 1 week's time, you need to complete the audit. In that particular case, if I communicate to the previous auditor and then to take his no objection certificate and then to complete the audit, I may not have time. So how to overcome this particular situation here, where there are guidelines that is provided in my code of ethics, very beautiful deliberations that is given in our revised code of ethics here, where assuming that in case of a government audit or where there are strict timelines have been provided, I may even go for a conditional acceptance. I will communicate, but I can take up the audit, but subject to that particular communication, like that I can go for. Even online email communications are permitted, oral communications are not permitted. It should be written that I have to communicate. I need not bother about whether the other party responds or not. It is necessary for me to ensure that I retain the documentation that I have communicated and the communication has reached the other party here, where including your registered post with acknowledgement due or your speed post or hand in person, you can deliver that particular to the previous auditor with acknowledgement, or even email communication with the registered email ID of the previous auditor is permitted. There is a specific advice by AASB in this particular regard, where in this case UDIN is not required for NOC certificates. That is not compulsory in this particular aspect here. Also, I need to ascertain whether my appointment is valid or not, whether my appointment has been made after complying with various procedures as per the Companies Act or as per the respective legislation in which I got appointed. It is the duty of the incoming auditor to ensure that he is ascertaining that his appointment is valid. Otherwise, he will be guilty of this professional misconduct. Also, very importantly, sir, I have done all this. Now there is an appointment. I have taken up the appointment. Can I take up the appointment? Answer is no. I need to comply with SA 210 preconditions. Sir, there are so many complications that you are talking about. Is it practical? Definitely it is practical. Definitely it is implementable. What is that I require is only to document this, where we do actually all these particular aspects. This is an eye-opener session. Please ensure that all these are all documented very properly. Like there are 3 preconditions before accepting the appointment. One is whether the management uses an acceptable financial reporting framework, whether management is accepting the premise on which audit is being conducted. There should not be any restriction in the scope of audit in the appointment by itself. If all these are all satisfied, then only I can go for communicating the same and then accept the audit assignment. Without that, I cannot accept, as it will be a violation of SA 210 here. There are certain other standards. I'm just including the wide impact of other standards also apart from SA 230. SA 220 that talks about quality control. SA 240 that talks about auditors' responsibility relating to fraud. There are 2 types of frauds that I need to bother about as per standards. One is fraudulent financial reporting and other misappropriation of assets are the 2 areas where I need to focus upon. I need to have a documentation, what are all the processes that I have performed. Another very important and interesting SA is 250. That is nothing but no-CLAR, consideration of laws and regulations of audit of financial statements with regard to laws that have a direct effect on the financial statements, with regard to laws and regulations that do not have direct effect of the financial statements, non-compliance of the same, how it is going to impact on the auditor, how it is going to influence on the auditor's report as per SA 250, 300 planning, 315 very base standard that talks about identifying and assessing the risk of middle misstatement. Sometime back I have also discussed about this. Per 450 evaluating the misstatements, 550 again a related party transaction, how I need to carefully verify, similar to that of your Companies Act compliance related party, LODR regulations also applicable here, where your accounting standards also applicable, Ind AS, including my standards on auditing are also applicable, specific to related party transaction, because the per se related party transactions are not prohibited. It is a very good transaction, but there is a likelihood of impact on the arm's length price. There is a likelihood of prejudicial transactions to the company. There is a likelihood of possibility of management fraud and bias that could be there. All these are all the opportunities that I cannot negate. I need to go for navigating that and then to understand the impact on its financial statements. 570, very important standard, especially under COVID situation. A beautiful advisory is also provided by AASB in this particular regard, reporting on going concern, how to evaluate what extra caution to be taken up by the auditors. using the work of another auditor, 600 in case of a component. Say, for example, where there are one or more branches are there when the auditor is going to use the work done by the branch auditor's case. And then 610 that talks about using the work of internal auditors. Even CARO 2020 is having a specific question on using the work of internal auditors by the statutory auditor here. And reporting standards like 700, 701, 705, 706, 720, all are something core standards, always considered to be very, very relevant, including the base standard of SA 230, 200, 500 and all. Once you start exploring these particular standards, standards will always come very handy to you because it's not something new. Whatever the process and procedures that we do actually implement in our audit is what documented in a theoretical form in a literature, technical literature called standards. The moment we are in a position to comply with that, the confidence and the quality improvement, the enhancement of the quality will be substantial, and then I will be in a very easy position to comply and to save my skin in this particular regard. Also, SA 500 that also talks about rules of reliability. One important point that I would like to implement here is documentary evidences are more reliable than in any audit evidences in any other form, which includes either in paper or electronic in any other medium here, which is a reliability, rules of reliability that is provided by SA 500 here. Also, there are certain peer review enabler modules like that. We may also have certain softwares. There are certain documentation software. This is one of the documentation software that is available in the market where you may have self-review checklist, including which can be used for peer reviews here. Say, for example, whether the engagement partner has evaluated the acceptance, continuance of the engagement, considering the ethical requirements and client's integrity and firm's competency, capability, time, and resources. Whether yes, no, not applicable. This is an enabler. So that I go for yes or no, and then I also document the reason how it is being done. All these are all the questions that can be a tool that will be used by the audit team, so as to ensure none of the area was missed out, and then I am complying with the requirements here, which will easily given to the peer reviewer. He can come and verify this and then say yes, that's all. Whether engagement team has obtained sufficient appropriate audit evidence and conclude on the appropriateness of management use of going concern. This will be having a specific impact of SA 570, and then there is also possibility of attaching documents here where there are softwares available, where whatever the documents or whatever the analytical procedures, say for example, there are cash flows, there are future cash flows that is prepared by the management, or there are future orders in hand which enable the company to assess that the going concern is a valid basis of accounting. That can be shown as an audit evidence here, which is giving a documentation, which is also giving an evidence, which is also helping me to conclude it properly here. Like that, there are softwares could be also be used by the auditors with regard to audit tools as a part of my audit tool here. These three important literatures that I'd like to go in for, please download whenever you have time and ensure that your audit team also uses the same. A beautiful literature that is provided by ICAI. One is Practitioner's Guide to Audit of Small Entities, Implementation Guide to SA 230, and then e-booklet on sample checklist on essays, which is very comprehensive. Essay wise, you have that particular checklist that is available. All that is there for the practicing professionals to ensure that you are complying with all legal and regulatory requirements, and then happily enjoy the status of integrity, being a proud professional chartered accountants that is enjoyed in the society here. I am sure that my members will be largely benefited by actually implementing all this particular aspects, that whatever, whether it may be audit quality, maturity model, or the initiative taken with regard to audit documentation perspective here. I'm sure that we may be implementing, but I would like to enhance the same with all this, whatever that I know in this particular regard. I thank all the participants for your patience listening and your motivation. I also thank the chairman and all other office bearers of SIRC. I also thank my Guru CA MP Vijay Kumar sir for sharing the dice and providing me an opportunity to speak along with him, and all the persons who are behind the screen to ensure this particular program, knowledge sharing program, is happily shared with all my learned members of SIRC here. Thank you, dear friends, and that's all from my end, and over to the organizers to have any questions to be handled.
Thank you for the explanations. So we have 3 questions.
Yes.
Hope the screen is visible.
I'm unable to, just a minute. Yeah, I'm able to see this particular screen. If a loan outstanding balances cannot confirm due to non-availability of bank loan statement, also interest, I'm unable to read it. Also, just a minute, the screen is not visible. Also, interest is due but not paid. If loan outstanding balances cannot confirm due to non-availability of bank loan statement, also interest is due but not paid. In this case, how to report in audit report? Okay, where you may even apply say 505 in this particular regard with regard to external confirmations, where the bank loan statement is also not available, and where we need to do a reconciliation, and then we need to try its impact on the financial statements, sir. Where there is a loan that you have borrowed, you may have a reconciliation aspect, and your repayment is also not reflected in the bank statements. Then it means that there is a non-payment here. Whether it is acceptable, we need to have a communication with regard to the correspondence with regard to the banker also. At times there may be a whether provision has been made in this particular regard. Payment may be made or not made. Whether a provision has been made in this particular regard for non-payment, is there any penalty, or is there any other breach or any other financial impact has to be considered, and my verification of this has to be taken out. And if it is considered to be a material aspect with regard to financial statements, I may even go for qualification in this particular regard, because in that particular case, I am not having sufficient appropriate audit evidence being a material component of the particular financial statements here. On the other hand, in spite of non-availability of a loan statement from the banker, external confirmation is not available. However, my reconciliations in this particular regard is in a position to prove right balance is stated in the balance sheet. I may satisfy, I may document on what basis I am satisfying. I may even go for a clean opinion in this particular regard, but I need to necessarily get a management's representation in this particular regard, and a very careful consideration, auditor's judgment has to be applied in this particular case, especially when there is external confirmation is not available here. There is a possibility of fraud, or there is a possibility of material misstatement, has to be necessarily identified and considered by the auditor in this particular regard. I was in service long. At the time, each year, same or different assistant asked for accounting process. My staff were getting irritated. Had the firm document the process, it will be very helpful. Okay, this is from the service perspective. Yeah, exactly. This is what we also talk about benchmarking, where benchmarking this particular way of audit process, standardized templates and checklists will be really helpful. But it also depends on the individual person's interest in learning the particular aspects. Always, it's without communication, without obtaining explanations, audit cannot possible. So it is a mutual benefit that is to go in. So as you are rightly pointing it out, the firm's policy documentation has to be there in place, so as to ensure that the knowledge about the client's business, 315 will talk about it, where the right environment, knowing the environment, operations of the particular client. My permanent audit file will be helping the audit assistants to understand about that particular client and the way in which they operate. That will be a better perspective. ICAI has permitted a time lag of 60 days of generation of urine. It is open secret as signing of financials backdated. How the audit documentation demonstrate that the document obtained is after the date of signing the financials. No, I don't fully agree with this particular statement. Maybe there may be certain exceptions could be there, but it is not an open secret that always the financial statements are backdated. There are very good integrated chartered accountants are there to do the right aspects. Yes, I do accept there are certain exceptions could be there in this regard, that here it is not necessary that I need to demonstrate that the audit document has been obtained after the date of signing the financials. Audit documentation has to be obtained before the date of financial statements. On that basis only, I should sign the financial statement is what the policy with which we need to operate here. That's it with regard to the questions, and that's all from my end.
Thank you. Thanks for the excellent sessions, sir, on awareness program, audit maturity models, and audit documentation. And we thank you on behalf of the chairman and our office bearers. Thank you, sir. Look forward to have more sessions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's my pleasure.